The storm was swallowing Brightwater Cove when a Navy SEAL's German Shepherd refused to stay quiet. Rhett Langford thought the dog had heard an animal beneath the frozen pier. But under the old wooden beams, half buried in snow, lay an elderly woman clutching a cedar box like her last heartbeat. One bare foot was turning blue, her lips were trembling, and still she whispered about a green light no one must let die. Behind the trees, a white care home van sat with its lights off, pretending it had never been there. Before sunrise, one dog's warning would uncover stolen mercy, buried names, and a town's forgotten soul. Tell us where you're watching from, share your thoughts after the story. And please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 unsubscribers. Brightwater Cove looked almost innocent when winter dressed it in light. Snow lay across the rooftops in clean white folds. The birch trees beyond Main Street stood pale and shining, their narrow trunks rising from the drifts like the bones of some old northern god who had fallen asleep beside Lake Superior and never bothered to wake. The lake itself stretched beyond the harbor in a sheet of blue steel, bright in places where the weak afternoon sun touched it, dark in others where the coming storm gathered its breath. To a stranger, the town might have looked peaceful. Rhett Langford knew better. At 34, Rhett still carried the shape of a man built by discipline rather than vanity. He stood 1.83 meters tall, with a compact, lean strength that came from work, cold, and years of training, not from showing muscle in mirrors. His face was clean-shaven, the square jaw and sharp cheekbones making him look sterner than he meant to. His dark brown hair was cut close in a military style, though slightly longer than regulation now, as if civilian life had been allowed to grow by half an inch and no farther. His skin was fair, but the northern wind had roughened it, leaving a weathered edge along his cheeks. His gray-blue eyes moved quietly over windows, roads, hands, exits, old habits dressed as caution. He wore the same clothing he wore most days, an old olive and military gray tactical combat shirt with worn shoulders and frayed cuffs, old combat pants in earth brown mixed with moss green, scuffed earth brown military work boots, and a black military watch on his left wrist. Nothing on him looked new. New things invited questions. Old things had already learned silence. He stepped out of Beach Sun General with 2 paper bags against his chest, and a third tucked under one arm. Milo Beach, the store owner, leaned in the doorway behind him. Milo was a broad, soft-bellied man in his late 50s, with a gray beard trimmed unevenly, and the kind of red cheeks that came from equal parts cold weather and arguing with suppliers. He wore suspenders over a plaid shirt and had a pencil permanently tucked behind one ear, though Rhett had never once seen him use it. "Storm's moving faster than they said," Milo called. Rhett glanced toward the sky. The clouds over the lake had turned bruised and heavy, pressing low above Brightwater Cove. "They usually do," Rhett said. Milo nodded at the bags. "You got enough up there?" "Batteries, oil, canned stew, first aid refills, thermal blankets, coffee, and dog food?" From the back seat of Rhett's old dark green pickup, Kestrel barked once. Milo pointed through the windshield. "That animal understood the accusation. He understands most insults," Rhett said, shifting the bags higher. "He just doesn't respect all of them." Kestrel was a 7-year-old male German Shepherd K9 with the balanced strength of a working dog. His coat was clearly black and brown, a deep black saddle across his back, warm brown on his chest and legs, a darker muzzle brushed lightly with silver, and intelligent amber-brown eyes that seemed to weigh the world before trusting it. His ears stood alert, sharp as little watchtowers, and a simple collar rested against the thick fur at his neck. He was not oversized or showy. He was built for work, built for weather, built for the sacred business of finding what others missed. Milo looked past Rhett toward the town square, where silver and blue banners snapped in the wind. "You hear they're doing another presentation tonight?" he asked. "Lumen Ridge people. Marina. Spa. Restaurants. Whole shiny miracle." Rhett loaded the bags into the truck bed and tightened the straps. "I heard. Might be good for us," Milo said, though his voice carried the tired caution of a man who had seen hope come through town wearing polished shoes before. "Could bring jobs. Visitors. Folks buying more than beans and road salt." Rhett looked toward the banner. "Lumen Ridge Wellness Marina. A brighter future for Brightwater Cove." The poster showed glass lodges, a clean boardwalk, warm restaurants, smiling tourists, and a marina full of boats that had clearly never scraped against winter ice. It was beautiful in the way renderings were beautiful. No mud, no old men with bad knees, no unpaid bills, no leaking roofs, no people who had survived too much to fit the color palette. Rhett noticed something else. The northern point was drawn as an open promenade, sunset seating, decorative lanterns, a neat path for visitors to stroll with paper cups of expensive coffee. There was no blue lantern station. The old lighthouse had stood on that point for as long as Rhett could remember. Not a grand lighthouse, not the kind painted on postcards, but a squat wooden station, with a small tower and a blue-green lamp that once winked through storms. As a boy, Rhett had seen it from the back seat of his father's truck, glowing in bad weather like a stubborn eye refusing to close. He had not thought about it in years. Now its absence on the poster bothered him. Not enough to say anything, enough to stay. Milo followed his gaze. "Pretty picture, isn't it?" "Too pretty," Rhett said. Milo snorted. "That's the Navy in you talking?" "No, that's winter." He climbed into the driver's seat and shut the door against the cold. Kestrel leaned forward from the back seat and placed his muzzle near Rhett's shoulder. His breath fogged the air between them. 3 days inside, Rhett told him. No hero work. Kestrel blinked once. "That includes you." The dog's ears tilted forward, which was not agreement. It was more like a lawyer declining to answer. Rhett started the engine. The truck rolled away from the general store and into the heart of Brightwater Cove. Main Street glowed under strings of winter lights. The bakery windows were steamed from inside. A white church with a narrow steeple stood at the corner, its bell half buried in snow. A boat repair shop sat near the harbor road, closed for the season but still smelling faintly of oil and lake water whenever the wind shifted right. People moved quickly along the sidewalks, carrying groceries, salt bags, firewood, and the private fears everyone pretended were just errands. Brightwater was not dying dramatically. That would have been easier to notice. It was thinning, one shuttered storefront at a time. One young family moving south. One tax bill folded twice and placed under a magnet on the refrigerator. One old fisherman selling tools he had once sworn would be buried with him. Rhett understood why people wanted Lumen Ridge to be real. He also understood that when a town got desperate enough, it could mistake a rope for a leash. He turned onto Harbor Road, where the lake opened wider to his right. The wind came harder here, carrying the metallic scent of ice and deep water. The storm was closer now. Snow began to sweep across the pavement in pale ribbons. Kestrel shifted in the back seat. Rhett saw it in the mirror. The dog had lifted his head, ears high, body still. "What?" Kestrel did not bark. Not yet. His nose moved once, slow and deliberate, toward the north. Rhett followed the line of his gaze. North Pier lay ahead, an old wooden structure jutting toward the lake, half forgotten after the newer harbor walkway was built farther south. In summer, teenagers fished there and tourists took pictures at sunset. In winter, locals avoided it unless they were stubborn, careless, or carrying memories too heavy for safer places. The pier was nearly empty now. Snow had gathered on its railings. The old planks looked gray and slick. Beneath it, the support beams descended into shadow and ice. Kestrel gave a low growl. Rhett's hand tightened on the wheel. "Leave it," he said. Kestrel barked. It was not a warning bark, not exactly. It was sharper than that, a hard sound that struck the cab and seemed to remain there. Rhett slowed. Kestrel barked again, louder, then clawed at the door handle. That was when unease moved through Rhett's chest. Kestrel had been trained to obey. He had also been trained to know when obedience was less important than life. Rhett had seen him ignore commands twice before, and both times someone had been breathing where no one thought to look. The truck rolled to the shoulder. Snow crunched beneath the tires. For several seconds, Rhett sat with both hands on the wheel. The last time he had ignored a sound in bad weather, it had come through a radio. Jonas Vale had been 29, broad-shouldered and quick to laugh, with sandy hair that never stayed flat, and a crooked smile that made officers suspicious. And children trust him instantly. He had served beside Rhett in conditions that turned men into either brothers or ghosts. During the rescue on Lake Superior, Jonas had been the one still out there when the wind shifted. His voice had come thin through the static. Not words, not at first, just breath. Then Rhett's name. Then the order came to pull back. Too dangerous. Visibility gone. Ice forming. No second boat until the storm dropped. Rhett had obeyed. By morning, the lake had taken back every sign of Jonas except one cracked rescue beacon, and the watch Rhett still wore beneath his sleeve sometimes, though the black military watch on his left wrist marked the living hours. The dead kept their own time. Kestrel barked again. Rhett opened his eyes. "All right," he whispered, "show me." Before Rhett opened the door, Kestrel stopped barking. The sudden silence was worse. The German Shepherd pressed his nose to the cold window and let out one low, broken whine, small, almost grieving. Rhett saw the fog of the dog's breath bloom against the glass, and for one impossible second it looked like a handprint from the other side. Not a sign, he told himself. Not a ghost. Just cold air and an old wound. But his body was already moving. because some warnings did not need to be understood before they were obeyed. The wind struck him as soon as he stepped out. It came off the lake with teeth. Rhett zipped the collar of his tactical shirt as high as it would go, though it did little against the gust. He opened the rear door, and Kestrel launched out before the command left his mouth. "Kestrel, steady!" The dog did not slow. He bounded through the snow toward the side of North Pier, not along the top planks but down the slope where the land fell beneath the old structure. His paws punched through crusted drifts. His black saddle flashed against the white. His collar caught a brief spark of gray light. Rhett followed. The slope was slick with hidden ice. His boots slid once, and he caught himself against a frozen post. His knee complained. Old injury, old argument, but he ignored it. The cold filled his lungs so sharply it felt like swallowing broken glass. Beneath the pier, the world changed. Above him, the planks groaned. Wind pushed snow through the gaps in thin white streams. The lake moved somewhere beyond the ice shelves, dark water licking at the edges with a slow, patient sound. Shadows gathered between the beams. Kestrel stood near one of the supports, body low, ears forward. He barked once toward a drift piled against the inner timbers. Rhett stopped. At first he saw only cloth, a heap of gray and blue half buried. Trash, maybe, a torn tarp, old netting. Then the cloth moved. Rhett's mind went very quiet. The old training entered him without ceremony. Scan, approach, breath, hands, threats, cold, time. He dropped to one knee beside the shape and brushed snow away. An elderly woman lay curled against the frozen wood. She was small, almost weightless looking beneath the snow, with narrow shoulders and a fragile frame folded inward as if the storm had tried to close her like a letter. Her hair was silver white, thin and wet where it clung to her face. Deep lines marked her cheeks, not only from age but from a life that had spent years looking into wind. Her skin was pale, with a bluish cast around the lips. She wore thin institutional-looking clothing beneath an old patchwork coat, and one foot was bare, reddened and stiff from cold. The other still wore a soft slipper. But her hands were fierce. They clutched a small cedarwood box against her chest with the strength of someone holding the last surviving piece of a burned house. Kestrel pressed close to her side, whining now, his body angled against the wind. Rhett touched her neck, a pulse, weak but there. "Mom," he said, leaning close. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. The cold had made her look almost carved from wax, but there was something stubborn in her face. A fine, proud structure remained beneath the frailty. A narrow nose, a strong chin softened by age, and a mouth that looked as though it had once corrected foolish men for sport. "Mom, my name is Rhett. I'm going to help you." Her fingers tightened around the box. He pulled a thermal blanket from the emergency pouch at his belt, shook it open, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he stripped off the outer layer from his truck kit, an old, insulated field blanket he had grabbed before coming down, and tucked it over her legs. Kestrel nudged the woman's wrist. Her eyes opened. They were pale blue-gray, clouded by cold and age, but not empty. For a moment she did not look at Rhett. She looked at the dog. Her trembling hand rose less than an inch and touched Kestrel's muzzle. The dog went still. The woman's lips moved. Rhett bent closer. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what?" Her breath hitched. Her eyes shifted past him, toward the north point where the old lighthouse would be if the snow had not swallowed the view. "Don't let the blue light go out." Rhett frowned. "What blue light?" "When it goes out," she whispered, each word thin as thread. "The poor disappear first, then the old, then their names." The words made no sense, yet they landed in Rhett's chest with the weight of a warning. "What's your name?" Her gaze drifted. "Adeline," she breathed. "Adeline Wren." Rhett had heard the name before, though he could not place it. Brightwater was full of names that clung to old buildings, old stories, old roads nobody used anymore. "Adeline, I'm going to carry you to my truck." "No." Panic flashed through her with surprising force. "The box. You keep the box." Her eyes searched his face, testing him. Whatever she saw there did not calm her entirely, but it was enough. Or perhaps Kestrel was enough. Her hand remained tangled weakly in the dog's fur. Rhett slid one arm beneath her shoulders and the other under her knees. When he lifted her, anger moved through him so suddenly he almost lost his breath. She was too light. Not simply old light, neglected light, forgotten light. Kestrel led the way up the slope. The climb was harder than it should have been. Snow broke under Rhett's boots. The wind pushed against him. Adeline shivered in his arms. Her cedar box pressed between them like a second heart. Twice she murmured words he could not understand. Once she said, "Room of names," and once, "Follow the green glass." By the time they reached the truck, Rhett's hands were numb. He laid Adeline across the back seat and covered her with 2 thermal blankets from the supplies. Kestrel jumped in beside her without waiting for permission, and curled against her legs, careful not to put weight on them. He rested his head near her hand. Rhett shut the door and stood for 1 second in the storm, breathing hard. That was when he saw the van. It sat beyond the curve of the service road, half hidden between pines. White body, no headlights, no movement. Snow gathered along its roof and windshield, but not enough to mean it had been there long. On the side, dark lettering showed through the blowing snow. Willowmere House. Rhett knew Willowmere. Everyone in Brightwater did. It was the senior care home at the edge of town, a clean brick building with trimmed hedges in summer and cheerful newsletters posted at the clinic. People said it was professional. People said it was safe. People said many things when they did not have to live behind the doors they described. The van's interior light flickered once, then went dark. Rhett stared until the snow nearly erased it. A sensible man would have called the sheriff first. A cautious man would have driven directly to the clinic. A man who had spent years perfecting the art of staying uninvolved would have told himself there was probably an explanation. Rhett got behind the wheel. Inside the truck, the heater coughed awake. Adeline shivered beneath the blankets, her hand still locked around the cedarwood box. Kestrel lay pressed against her legs, amber-brown eyes fixed on Rhett in the mirror. Those eyes did not plead, they accused, or maybe Rhett was accusing himself. He put the truck in gear. As North Pier disappeared behind them, the storm thickened over Brightwater Cove. Snow swallowed the old wooden beams, the service road, the pines, and the silent white van, pretending it had never been there. Adeline stirred. Her voice came again, barely stronger than the wind. "Blue Lantern," she whispered. "Tell them I kept the keys." Rhett looked at the road ahead. His jaw tightened. He did not know who "them" was. He did not know what keys she meant. He did not know why a woman from Willowmere had been left beneath a frozen pier with one bare foot and a cedar box clutched to her ribs. But he knew one thing with the cold certainty of a man who had once let a signal fade into static. This time he had stopped. This time Kestrel had heard what the world tried to bury. And this time Rhett Langford would not drive past. The storm did not arrive like weather. It arrived like judgment. By the time Rhett Langford turned off Harbor Road, the world behind him had begun to vanish. North Pier disappeared first, swallowed by blowing snow. Then the pines along the service road blurred into dark smudges. Then the lake itself, that great blue metal god of the north, withdrew behind a white curtain as if refusing to witness what men did in its name. The windshield wipers fought in tired arcs. Snow struck the glass so hard that the headlights showed only a tunnel of white, then black, then white again. Rhett kept both hands steady on the wheel, shoulders still beneath his old olive and military gray tactical combat shirt. The worn fabric clung damply to his arms where melted snow had seeped in. His black military watch sat cold against his left wrist, ticking through another rescue he had not planned to make. In the back seat, Adeline Wren shivered beneath 2 thermal blankets. She was small inside the heap of silver fabric, almost childlike in size but not in spirit. Even half frozen, her fingers remained locked around the cedarwood box on her chest. Her patchwork coat, soaked and stiff with snow, lay folded beside her, its many scraps of cloth darkened by moisture. One bare foot was wrapped in a towel Rhett had grabbed from the emergency kit. The other still wore the soft slipper she had somehow kept during whatever had happened before North Pier. Kestrel lay pressed along her legs. The 7-year-old male German Shepherd K9 did not sprawl or rest. His black and brown working body curved with careful precision, offering warmth without weight. His black saddle-marked back rose and fell in steady breaths. Warm brown fur along his chest brushed the edge of Adeline's blanket. His darker muzzle, silvered slightly with age, rested near her hand every few seconds. His amber-brown eyes lifted to her face, then to Rhett in the mirror, then back again. The dog had appointed himself guardian of something fragile. Rhett did not argue with him. "Stay with me, Mrs. Wren," he said. Adeline's eyelids trembled. "Not Mrs. Wren," she whispered, the words thin and broken. "That was my mother-in-law, and she had the personality of wet flour." Rhett glanced at the mirror. A person who could insult a dead mother-in-law from the edge of hypothermia had not fully left the world. "Adeline, then." "That depends," she murmured. "Are you selling something?" "No." "Good. Then Adeline will do." A corner of Rhett's mouth moved before he could stop it. The road climbed away from Brightwater Cove and into the birch hills north of town. The trees leaned close on both sides, white trunks flickering through the storm like pale sentries. His house stood at the end of a narrow lane, tucked into the slope above the lake. In summer, the place looked almost gentle. Cedar walls, a low roof, a small porch, birches all around, and a view of the water through the trees. In winter, it looked more like an outpost. Rhett had chosen it for that reason. A man could see anyone coming. A man could leave without explaining himself. Tonight, as the headlights found the porch through the snow, the house looked less like a retreat and more like the last boat at the dock. He parked as close as he could, killed the engine, and got out. The wind hit him sideways. He opened the rear door and bent carefully toward Adeline. "I'm going to carry you inside. The dog comes. He's already decided that." Kestrel jumped down first, landing in the snow with a soft huff. He ran ahead to the porch, then turned back, ears erect, eyes bright with command. Rhett gathered Adeline in his arms. She was lighter than she should have been. The cedar box pressed between them. His knee protested on the steps. Kestrel barked once. "I see it," Rhett muttered. The dog gave a low sound that might have been agreement or criticism. Inside, the house smelled of cold ash, cedarwood, oiled leather, coffee grounds, and the faint metallic scent of gear that had seen hard weather. Rhett had never decorated the place with much tenderness. A map of Lake Superior hung beside the door. Coiled rope rested on hooks. Snowshoes crossed above a shelf of emergency radios. A field medical kit sat on the low bench as if waiting for tonight to justify its existence. There were no framed family photographs, no cheerful clutter, no soft evidence of a life shared. The room had always suited him because it asked nothing. Tonight, with an old woman nearly frozen in his arms and a German Shepherd watching him like a judge with paws, it suddenly seemed ashamed of itself. Rhett laid Adeline on the thick wool rug before the fireplace. He worked fast but not roughly. Training guided his hands, but something older guided his care. He placed folded blankets beneath her head, checked her breathing, then moved to the hearth. The first match broke. The second flared, then died. His fingers were too cold. He stopped, breathed once, and reached into the metal box on the mantel for the long storm lighter he used for the stove. His hand brushed the waterproof watch he kept wrapped in an old cloth at the back of the shelf. The watch that had belonged to Jonas Vale. Rhett did not pick it up. He did not need to. Some things could burn from across a room. The third flame caught, kindling whispered, then snapped. Within minutes, firelight moved across the cabin walls, touching the ropes, the radios, the old map, the black boots by the door, the damp shoulders of Rhett's tactical shirt, and Kestrel's alert face. Rhett set a pot of water to warm and crossed to the landline. Cell service on the ridge was more rumor than fact. The landline crackled after the second ring. On the fourth, a woman answered with a voice sharp enough to clean a wound. "If this is about your knee again, Rhett Langford, I'm charging extra for stupidity after dark." Dr. Hazel Portman had been Brightwater Cove's physician for more than 30 years. She was 63, lean and quick-moving, with short silver-gray hair usually tucked behind her ears, pale gray-blue eyes that missed very little, and reading glasses she wore on a cord against her chest like a sheriff wore a badge. She had treated fishermen, teachers, drunks, toddlers, widows, snowplow drivers, and half the men in town who considered denial a medical plan. Her kindness had teeth. "Not my knee," Rhett said. "I found someone." The humor vanished from Hazel's voice. "Alive?" "Yes. Elderly woman. Hypothermic. Found under North Pier. Barefoot on one side, conscious off and on." The line popped with static. "Name? Adeline Wren." There was a pause. Small, but Rhett heard it. "Adeline?" Hazel said, softer now. "All right. Listen carefully. Do not put her in a hot bath. Do not put direct heat on her skin. Warm room, dry layers, blankets. If she can swallow, warm sweet tea. Small sips. Get wet clothing off only if you can preserve dignity and keep her covered. Slow warming. I know. I am saying it because men like you hear cold woman and decide to wrestle death with a blowtorch." Kestrel looked up from beside Adeline as if he agreed. Rhett exhaled, noted. Breathing, weak but steady. Pulse? Fast. Thready at first, improving slightly. Confusion? Yes. She fell likely. Bruising unknown. "Roads are closing," Hazel said. "There's a tree down near the clinic road and power's flickering here. I cannot get to your ridge until the plows clear at least one lane. Write down the time you found her, the time you called me, her condition, and everything I tell you. Not for my vanity, for her protection." Rhett looked toward Adeline. Her eyes were half open, fixed on Kestrel. Her fingers moved weakly against the dog's fur as if counting proof of life. "I understand. If her breathing worsens, call me again. If she stops responding, you do not wait for my permission to move." "I won't? And Rhett? Yeah?" Hazel's voice hardened. Whatever happened to put Adeline Wren under North Pier did not begin under North Pier. The line clicked, then dissolved into static. Rhett stood with the receiver in his hand for a moment. Outside, the storm pressed against the windows with white fists. Inside, Kestrel lowered his head beside Adeline and gave a soft, worried sigh. Rhett set the receiver down and moved. He noted the time on a pad near the phone. He wrote Hazel's instructions in block letters. He warmed water, stirred in honey, and tested it against his wrist. Then he knelt beside Adeline. "Adeline," he said, "I need to remove the wet coat. You keep the box. I won't take it." Her eyes opened sharply. For a moment, the fragile old woman vanished, and Rhett saw someone else beneath the age, a keeper of doors, a woman who had once stood in storms and told frightened people where to sit, what to eat, and when to stop pretending they were fine. "My pockets," she whispered. "I'll keep everything where you can see it." "You say that like a man who has never misplaced his own courage." Rhett went still. Adeline blinked, then frowned faintly. "That was rude." "Accurate, perhaps, but rude." Kestrel gave one soft sneeze. Rhett looked at him. "Don't encourage her." With careful movements, he helped Adeline out of the soaked patchwork coat while keeping blankets around her. The coat was heavier than it looked. At first glance, it seemed like a poor woman's ragged winter layer, but close to the fire, Rhett saw it had been made with strange devotion. Squares of denim, wool, canvas, velvet, flannel, and faded cotton had been stitched together by hand. Some patches were bright despite age. Others were nearly worn through. The seams crossed the coat like roads on an old map. He spread it over 2 chairs near the hearth. Something clinked inside. Then another small sound. Metal. More than one piece. Rhett opened the nearest pocket and found a brass key with a paper tag protected under cloudy tape. Lamp room. He opened another. North bunk. Another. Kitchen. A small square of blue-green glass wrapped in cloth. A tin nameplate reading Mabel Dorsey. A photograph, edges soft from age, showing a squat wooden station on a snowy point, its small tower glowing with a blue-green lamp. People stood in front of it, wrapped in blankets, smiling with the stunned relief of those who had been cold enough to understand mercy. On the back, written in careful script, were the words, "Blue Lantern Station, Storm Night 1987. Rhett looked at Adeline. She watched him with a vigilance that illness had not erased. "This is Blue Lantern." "No," she whispered. "That's one night of it." He found a folded paper map next. A room was circled in blue pencil. Room of Nanims. Another pocket held a small ledger bound in cracked green cloth. On the cover, faded but legible, were the words, "Green Light Fund." Rhett opened it only halfway, enough to see columns of names, dates, amounts, and notes. Coal for Mrs. Dorsey, medicine for Samuel Baird, window glass for Lorna Quill, stovepipe repair, blankets, boots, soup supplies, funeral flowers. The last entry made him pause, not because of the amount, because someone had written beneath it, "No one leaves unnamed." As Rhett turned the ledger toward the firelight, Kestrel suddenly rose. The German Shepherd did not bark. He walked to the patchwork coat, lowered his nose to the inside lining, and pressed one paw gently against a hidden seam near the heart. Rhett almost missed it. Then the seam parted under the dog's weight, revealing a narrow pocket stitched so neatly it had been invisible. Inside was a blank metal nameplate, polished clean, as if Adeline had carried it for someone not yet remembered. For reasons Rhett could not explain, his hand went at once to the old watch wrapped on the mantel, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Adeline saw where he looked. "Names get cold too," she whispered. Rhett did not answer. He took the blank plate, set it beside the others, and returned his attention to the ledger. He told himself he was only organizing evidence, but his hands were gentler than evidence required. Adeline took 3 careful sips of honeyed tea. She grimaced after the third. "You make tea like a man apologizing to water. It's warm. So is bath water." "I do not drink that either." Kestrel settled again beside her, placing his muzzle near her wrist. Adeline's fingers found the fur between his ears. "This one understands manners," she said. "He understands work. Same thing if taught properly." Rhett sat back on his heels. "Adeline, how did you get under the pier?" Her humor faded. The fire snapped once. Outside, the wind shoved snow against the wall with a long, dragging hiss. Adeline looked not at Rhett, but at the cedar box. "They said the east wing was cold," she murmured. "Willowmere. Pipes. Heat. Always pipes and heat when someone wants you moved without saying why." "You were being moved?" "3 of us. Maybe 4. They count old people differently when they are in a hurry." Rhett kept his voice even. "Where?" "South." Her brow tightened. "A partner place. Clean name, clean floors. No windows on the south doors." "Why before the storm?" Adeline closed her eyes. For a moment he thought she had drifted away. Then she spoke again, each sentence arriving like something pulled from deep snow. "There is a meeting. Men with maps. Women with folders. They draw Brightwater without its bones. They make the shore smooth. They make the poor invisible. They call it readiness. Lumen Ridge." Her hand tightened around the cedar box. "If I am not here, I cannot object. If I am confused, I cannot be heard. If I am moved, the light becomes inconvenient history." Rhett felt the old alertness sharpen in him. "You heard someone say that?" "Not in those words. Men like that never use honest words when polished ones will do." Her mouth twisted faintly. A girl cried in the hall. young, yellow hair tied low. She said Miller's cut would be dangerous if the wind turned. Vivian told her to document less fear and more cooperation. Rhett stored that away. Vivian. He had not yet heard the name, but the way Adeline said it made the room colder. Who is Vivian? Adeline's eyes opened. Shoes, she whispered. Rhett frowned. She stops outside doors, clean black shoes. You hear them before the keys go missing. Kestrel lifted his head. There it was again. The dog noticing what people tried to file under confusion. Rhett opened the cedar box only after Adeline nodded permission. Inside were more nameplates, a small cloth pouch of keys, the blue glass fragments matching half, and several folded papers tied with a green ribbon. He did not unfold the ribbon yet. Adeline's breathing had grown uneven. Hazel's warning returned to him. Slow warming, low stress. He closed the box and set it where Adeline's hand could rest on the lid. You said Green Light Fund, he said. What is it? Her expression changed. Fear stepped aside. Grief came forward. After the storm of '78, the lake took 3 boats and the cold took 7 people on land. Not drowning. Not accidents, cold houses, empty coal bins. Medicine skipped for heating oil. Brightwater learned shame that winter. Her fingers rubbed the edge of the blanket. So we made a fund. Not grand, no marble plaque. Fishermen gave, widows gave. The bakery gave day-old bread and sometimes money hidden in flour sacks. The church gave when it remembered Christ had been poor. We bought coal, medicine, boots, window glass, stovepipe, blankets. She swallowed. It saved people quietly. Quiet saving is still saving. Rhett looked at the ledger. Most entries were small, $20, $12, $50, $75 for a stove repair. Names, needs, dates. A whole town refusing, at least for a while, to let winter choose the weakest first. Then, near the final pages, the handwriting changed. Different pen, different hand. Rhett turned one page. The old human entries thinned. The notes became vague. Community transition support. Resident readiness, consulting preparation. North Shore elder advancement. His eyes narrowed. Adeline watched him. They touched it, she said. Who? The ones who smile with all their teeth covered. Before Rhett could ask more, the landline rang. Adeline flinched so hard the cedar box shifted. Kestrel rose instantly. Body between her and the sound. Rhett crossed to the phone. Langford. A woman's voice answered, smooth and controlled. Mr. Langford, this is Vivian Cross, director of Willowmere House. Rhett looked at Adeline. The old woman had gone very still. Vivian Cross did not sound cruel. That was the first thing Rhett noticed. Cruelty would have been easier. Her voice was soft, professional, warm in the way expensive gloves were warm. Designed to touch without leaving fingerprints. She was a woman Rhett could imagine perfectly without seeing her. Orderly, careful, the kind of person who could make a locked door sound like a safety measure. I understand one of our residents may be with you, Vivian said. Adeline Wren. She's here. Thank God. We have been terribly worried. Rhett let the silence sit. Vivian continued, still calm. Mrs. Wren has documented cognitive decline and anxiety episodes involving fixed beliefs about a former community property. She left supervised transport during a weather emergency. I found her under North Pier. Yes, a frightening incident. We are grateful you intervened. She was barefoot. A pause. Small. Sharp. We are reviewing how that happened. She was hypothermic, which is precisely why she requires professional care. She's receiving care. Dr. Hazel Portman is advising by phone. Roads are blocked. She is not being moved tonight. Vivian's voice softened further. Mr. Langford, I appreciate your concern. Truly, but misplaced compassion can become dangerous for elderly residents. Rhett looked across the room. Adeline's hand lay on Kestrel's neck. The dog stood like a dark and brown wall beside her, ears forward, eyes fixed on Rhett as if he were part of the pack's perimeter now and had better behave like it. Rhett said, transporting an elderly woman without proper winter clothing before a storm seems dangerous too. Again, we are reviewing the details. Review them in the morning. Mr. Langford. She stays tonight. For the first time, warmth left Vivian's voice. Only a little. Enough. I would caution you against making decisions beyond your authority. I'm not making a placement decision. I'm following medical advice during a weather emergency. Silence. Then Vivian said, keep her comfortable. I will call in the morning. The line clicked dead. Rhett stood with the receiver in his hand. Adeline's eyes were closed, but she was not asleep. She smiles when she takes things, the old woman whispered. Rhett returned the phone to its cradle. He wanted to ask more. He wanted names, dates, signatures, proof. He wanted to drive through the storm and put his fist through whatever polished office had sent an old woman into the snow with one bare foot. But outrage was a poor blanket. So he did what could be done. He added another log to the fire. He warmed more tea. He moved the coat farther from the flames so it would dry without scorching. He arranged the keys, nameplates, photograph, map, blue glass, and ledger on the table in careful rows, leaving the cedar box within Adeline's reach. Near midnight, her shivering eased, her breathing slowed. Kestrel finally lowered himself beside her again, though his eyes stayed open. Rhett sat at the table and opened the Green Light Fund ledger to the final pages. For nearly an hour he read. The early entries had names and needs. The later entries had organizations and phrases. The final large transfer had been marked with a small green glass symbol in the margin. It went first to North Shore Elder Advancement, then appeared in a note as Community Readiness Consulting, connected to Lumen Ridge Wellness Marina. Rhett did not fully understand the financial trail. He understood enough. Blue Lantern had not only been erased from a development poster. Something meant to keep people warm had been moved into language clean enough to hide a theft. He looked toward Adeline. The old woman slept with one hand on Kestrel's fur, the cedar box tucked close to her side, the blank nameplate lying on the table where the firelight touched it. Rhett reached to the mantel and took down Jonas Vale's wrapped watch. He unfolded the cloth. The watch was scratched, dead, and salt-stained from the lake. It had stopped at 2:17, though Rhett did not know if that was the hour Jonas vanished, or simply the moment water reached the mechanism. For years, he had kept it as punishment, a relic from the kingdom of what-ifs. He placed it beside the blank nameplate. Kestrel opened one amber-brown eye. "I know," Rhett said softly. The dog closed his eye again, satisfied or simply tired. Outside, the storm shook the birch trees until their white branches scraped the windows like fingers. Inside, the house that had always kept the world out held an old woman, a watch, a ledger, a cedar box, and a dog who had heard what men tried not to hear. Rhett did not sleep, not because of the storm, because somewhere between the keys and the ledger, between Vivian's careful voice and Adeline's trembling hand, his house had stopped being a bunker. It had become a witness. Morning came without warmth. The storm had loosened its fist over Brightwater Cove, but the sky still hung low and gray above the birch hills. Snow lay heavy against Rhett Langford's porch steps, piled so high along the railings that the house seemed to have been lowered into the earth overnight. The birch trees stood bent and glittering in the pale light, their white trunks rising from the drifts like quiet witnesses who had seen everything and chosen not to speak too soon. Rhett had not slept. He had sat near the kitchen table until dawn, listening to the wind, the fire, and Adeline Wren's uneven breathing from the rug beside the hearth. Every hour he had checked her pulse. Every half hour he had checked the warmth returning slowly to her fingers. Twice she woke confused. Once, she asked why the lamp room smelled like coffee. Once, she accused the firewood rack of standing there with the moral confidence of a deacon who had stolen jam. Both times, Kestrel raised his black and brown head, touched his nose gently to her wrist, and waited until her breathing settled. By 7, the road had become passable enough to risk the drive. Rhett shoveled a narrow path from the porch to the truck, the metal blade scraping over packed snow in hard strokes. His body moved with the efficiency of old training, but his mind kept circling the same fact. If Adeline stayed in his house too long, Vivian Cross could turn his rescue into interference. The old woman needed a doctor's record, a witness with credentials, and a place where Willowmere could not pretend the night under North Pier had been only a misunderstanding. He helped Adeline into dry layers from his emergency supplies and wrapped her in 2 blankets. Her patchwork coat, now dry, went around her shoulders. In daylight, the coat looked stranger and more deliberate than it had by firelight. Denim, wool, canvas, velvet, and flannel had been stitched into it like fragments of weather and memory. Some patches were faded thin, some were bright as little flags that had survived a war. Adeline sat in the passenger seat with her cedarwood box in her lap, one hand resting on top of it. "I object to being carried," she said. "I didn't carry you. You considered it. You were moving too slowly. I am old, not furniture. You nearly froze last night." "That does give me recent experience in the subject," she said, adjusting the blanket under her chin. "It does not make me a sofa." Kestrel climbed into the back seat and positioned himself behind her shoulder. The 7-year-old male German Shepherd K9 filled the rear space with quiet strength. Black saddle across his back, warm brown chest and legs, darker muzzle brushed with silver amber-brown eyes watchful beneath erect ears. He wore only his collar, but he carried himself with the solemn dignity of a soldier who had no use for medals. Rhett got behind the wheel. As the truck descended toward town, Brightwater Cove emerged through the thinning snow. Sunlight tried to break through the clouds and failed in patches, leaving the rooftops silver, the road blue-gray, and the lake beyond the harbor shining like a blade laid flat under frost. Chimneys smoked. Plow trucks scraped. People in thick coats dug out cars and waved across the street with the weary cheerfulness of northerners who believed complaining about snow was both a right and a civic duty. The Lumen Ridge banner still hung across the town square. One corner had torn loose in the storm and snapped in the wind, making the polished words bend and flash. A brighter future for Brightwater Cove. Adeline saw it through the windshield. Her fingers tightened on the box. "Pretty lies always buy good paper," she murmured. Rhett did not answer. Hazel Portman's clinic sat between the post office and a narrow brick building that had once been a barber shop. It had green shutters, a salted ramp, and a faded wooden sign painted with a caduceus that looked as if it had survived several decades of weather and professional irritation. Rhett parked close to the entrance. Hazel opened the door before he had finished helping Adeline down. In person, Dr. Hazel Portman looked exactly like her voice, lean, sharp, and difficult to fool. She was 63, with short silver-gray hair tucked neatly behind her ears, pale gray-blue eyes that moved faster than most people's excuses, and a narrow face lined by years of listening to patients lie about pain. She wore a white medical coat over a dark gray wool cardigan, dark scrub pants, and practical snow boots. Reading glasses hung from a cord against her chest. She had the air of a woman who had delivered babies, stitched fishermen, scolded mayors, and once bullied a blizzard into waiting its turn. "Inside," Hazel said. "No good morning?" Rhett asked. "I'll say good morning when people stop freezing under public infrastructure." Adeline studied Hazel. "You may be the first sensible person I've met since the dog." Hazel's mouth twitched. "Don't decide too fast. I own cold instruments." Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic, coffee, peppermint candy, and old paper files. The waiting room had 4 chairs, a rack of health pamphlets, and a watercolor of Lake Superior, painted by someone optimistic enough to use too much blue. Rhett helped Adeline onto the exam table. Kestrel lay near the door, not blocking it but clearly regarding the door as a suspicious invention. Hazel worked without drama. She checked temperature, blood pressure, pupils, reflexes, breathing, hands, feet, hip bruising, signs of frostbite and hydration. She asked Adeline her name, where she was, the season, and what she wanted for breakfast. "My name is Adeline Wren," the old woman said. "I am in Brightwater Cove. The season is winter, because the air has decided to bite. Breakfast should be something warm, but if you offer oatmeal without brown sugar, I will report you to a higher authority." Hazel wrote that down. Rhett watched from near the sink, arms folded. His old tactical combat shirt had dried stiffly from the previous night, the frayed cuffs rough against his wrists. He had changed nothing about himself before coming into town. He did not want to look softened. He wanted everyone who entered this clinic to understand he had seen the woman under the pier and would not be convinced to forget it. Hazel asked the date. Adeline hesitated. "Thursday." "Friday," Hazel said. "Dates change every morning," Adeline replied. "One should not build a religion around them." Hazel wrote again. "Fair." When the exam ended, Hazel pulled the curtain halfway and spoke quietly to Rhett. "Cold exposure, dehydration, bruising on the left hip from a fall or slide. No severe frostbite that I can see, but her bare foot needs monitoring. Some confusion, yes, but after hypothermia, stress, lack of sleep, and whatever happened before you found her, I'd be more concerned if she weren't confused. Can you say she's competent?" Hazel gave him a look over her glasses. "I can say there is no medical basis for anyone with a conscience to use last night as proof that she isn't." Adeline lifted one finger from the exam table. "Put that on a plaque." "I'm putting it in a medical note," Hazel said. "Less decorative, more useful." Rhett exhaled slowly. For the first time since North Pier, the ground beneath his felt slightly less like ice. The bell above the clinic door rang. Kestrel rose before anyone spoke, not fast, not with a bark. He simply stood, ears forward, black and brown body level, amber-brown eyes fixed on the entrance. A woman stepped into the clinic with 2 employees behind her. Vivian Cross did not bring the storm with her. She brought order. She was 45, tall but not imposing, with a slim, straight posture and chestnut-brown hair smoothed into a precise low knot at the nape of her neck. Her skin was fair and carefully kept. Her face was composed, elegant in a restrained way, with dark brown eyes that seemed trained to hold sympathy at a professional distance. She wore a long cream wool coat over an ivory turtleneck, dark tailored trousers, black leather gloves, and black leather shoes so clean they looked almost obscene against the slush outside. Rhett saw Adeline's body change. The old woman did not cry out. She did not plead. She shrank inward as if some room inside her had been locked from the outside. Her eyes went not to Vivian's face but to the black shoes. Kestrel stepped forward. He placed himself between the exam table and Vivian. No growl, no threat, Only a line. Vivian noticed, of course. Women like Vivian noticed everything and called it concern when useful. "Dr. Portman," she said warmly. "Thank you for taking care of Mrs. Wren." Hazel did not move from beside the exam table. "I take care of patients, Vivian, not paperwork." A tiny pause. Vivian smiled as though Hazel had made a charming local joke. Of course, behind her stood a broad man in a navy jacket embroidered with Willowmere House. He was in his late 30s with a square head, close-cropped blonde hair, pale skin reddened by the cold, and a thick neck that made his jacket collar strain. His name tag read Grant Morrow. His expression was not cruel. It was worse in its own way. It was blank, the look of a man who had learned to treat discomfort as part of the job. Beside him stood a young woman holding a tablet against her chest. She was 27, slight and narrow-shouldered, with dirty blonde hair tied in a low ponytail, and a face made pale by sleeplessness rather than winter. Her eyes were a faded green, nervous and watchful, always lowering a moment before they revealed too much. She wore pale blue scrubs beneath a thin gray cardigan, dark scrub pants, and white-gray medical shoes wet at the soles. A purple pen clipped to her tablet trembled slightly as her fingers tightened around it. Rhett did not know her name yet. Kestrel looked at her. The dog did not stiffen. He only tilted his head. Vivian opened a leather folder. "Mrs. Wren has documented cognitive decline and anxiety episodes involving fixed beliefs about a former community property," she said. Her departure from supervised transport created a severe safety concern. "She was found barefoot," Hazel said. Vivian's smile thinned at the edges. "We are reviewing how that occurred. Convenient place for a review to occur." Rhett almost smiled. Vivian turned to him. "Mr. Langford, I appreciate your intervention last night. Truly. But Mrs. Wren requires a structured environment. She has a history of hiding sharp objects in her clothing and becoming distressed when staff attempt redirection." Adeline's hand moved beneath the blanket until it found Kestrel's shoulder. Hazel's eyes narrowed. "What sharp objects?" Vivian looked almost regretful. "Keys." The word landed in the clinic like a small stone dropped down a well. Adeline's voice came thin but clear. "Only people afraid of open doors call keys weapons." The young employee with the tablet looked down. Rhett noticed. Vivian did not look at Adeline. She looked at Hazel. "We have a pending review regarding Mrs. Wren's decision-making capacity. Willowmere House is acting in her best interest." "Willowmere House is not a court," Hazel said. "No, but we are responsible for her safety." "Then start by explaining why she reached North Pier without one shoe." Grant shifted behind Vivian. The young woman swallowed. Vivian closed the folder halfway. Her calm remained, but something colder had entered it. "I am not here to argue. I am here to retrieve a resident." "No," Hazel said. This time Vivian did not smile. "Excuse me, Mrs. Wren remains under medical observation for cold exposure, dehydration, bruising, and acute stress. I am not releasing her into transport today. Doctor, not today." The room tightened around those two words. Kestrel stayed between Vivian and the exam table, steady as a carved guardian. Vivian's gaze flicked briefly to Rhett. "I would caution you, Mr. Langford, against becoming entangled in matters you may not fully understand." Rhett looked at Adeline, then at the black shoes, then at the folder. That's usually how understanding starts. For the first time, Vivian's expression cracked by a hair. Not anger exactly, recognition. The small irritation of a woman realizing a room would not arrange itself around her. She turned to Hazel. "I expect an update before evening." "You may expect many things," Hazel said. "This one might happen." Vivian gathered her employees and left. The bell rang again. Only after the door closed did Adeline release a breath. Kestrel remained standing for several more seconds, watching through the glass. Then the young woman with the tablet, already outside, turned back once. Her eyes met Rhett's through the clinic window. There was fear there, but not only fear. Something else pressed behind it, like a hand against frosted glass. Kestrel gave one low whine, not at Vivian, not at Grant, but at the young woman with the purple pen. The sound was so soft Hazel almost missed it. Rhett did not. He had heard Kestrel make that sound only around people trapped under rubble, under snow, or under a panic they could not name. The girl was standing upright in daylight, breathing cold air beside a clean white van. Yet somehow, to the dog, she sounded buried. By late morning, Hazel had settled Adeline in the small observation room behind the clinic. The old woman objected to the blanket color, the tea strength, and the pillow's lack of ambition, then fell asleep with Kestrel lying across the doorway like a dark sentinel. Rhett did not want to leave. Adeline opened one eye. "Go! I didn't say anything. You stood there like a fence post with guilt issues." Hazel, checking a chart, said, "Accurate." Rhett looked at Kestrel. "Stay with her." The dog's ears flicked once. Adeline touched his head. "He already knows which one of us needs supervision." That left Rhett with nowhere useful to put his concern. Hazel gave him a name. Iris Fenwick. 2 streets behind the church, elder law, retired, which in Iris's case means she no longer charges enough to scare people properly. Rhett found Iris Fenwick's house tucked behind a white church and 2 snow-heavy maples. The house was pale blue, narrow, and stubborn-looking. The walkway had been shoveled with mathematical precision. Iris opened the door before he knocked a second time. She was 68, small but solid, with silver and black hair cut neatly at her jaw and green-gray eyes that seemed to read footnotes on a man's soul. She wore a deep burgundy cardigan over a cream sweater, dark wool trousers, and low leather shoes. A pair of reading glasses rested on top of her head, and she held a red pen like a weapon she had used before. "You're Langford," she said. "Yes, Mom." "And the dog found Adeline?" "Yes, good dog, he knows. Most good dogs do." She let him in. Her living room had more books than furniture. Legal texts, town histories, binders labeled in careful handwriting, and old case files lined the walls. A burgundy leather folder lay open on the table beside a mug of tea gone cold. The room smelled of paper, lemon oil, and an argument waiting patiently for its turn. Iris listened without interrupting much. She stopped him only to clarify Vivian's exact words, Hazel's medical decision, and whether Adeline had clearly stated she did not want to return to Willowmere. "She did," Rhett said. "Good," Iris replied. "Not simple, but good." "Explain." "Willowmere cannot simply decide she is incompetent because it is convenient. A care facility may recommend, document petition. A court decides. Until then, Adeline has rights. If she understands who she is, where she is, and the basic consequences of her choices, her voice matters." She was confused. "She was hypothermic," Iris said sharply. "Confusion after being found half-frozen under a pier is not a blank check for institutional control." Rhett leaned forward, jaw tight. "What do we need? Evidence, not fury. Fury is satisfying and legally useless." He sat back. Iris tapped the red pen once against her folder. "Who authorized the transport? Why before the storm? Why was she improperly dressed? What is Willowmere's connection to Lumen Ridge? What is North Shore Elder Advancement? What is the legal status of Blue Lantern Station? And why does everyone seem nervous when an old woman mentions a lighthouse?" Rhett thought of Adeline's fingers on Kestrel's fur. "Where do I start?" "Library," Iris said. "Ask for Maribel Shaw. If Brightwater ever did something noble and later became embarrassed by it, Maribel will have filed it alphabetically." The Brightwater Public Library sat near the edge of the square, a red brick building with arched windows and a green copper roof. Inside, the air smelled of radiator heat, old paper, wet wool, and dust that had earned the right to remain. Maribel Shaw looked up from the front desk as Rhett entered. She was 44, slender and quiet, with dark brown hair clipped back by a plain metal barrette and warm brown eyes behind thin copper-framed glasses. She wore a navy parka over a light brown sweater, a moss-green scarf, dark pants, and winter boots still dusted with snow. Her face had the gentle focus of someone who had spent years listening to people ask for small things while guarding large ones. "You're Rhett Langford," she said. "Seems to be going around. And this is about Adeline." He studied her. "You heard? In towns like this, news travels faster than emergency vehicles." Her expression changed. "Is she alive?" "Yes, at Hazel's clinic." Maribel closed her eyes briefly, relief passing over her face like a hand. Then she turned the desk sign to "back in 10 minutes." Rhett glanced at it. "Will it be 10? "No," she said. "But people trust signs more than people, so we use that weakness." She led him through a staff door and down a narrow stairwell to the basement archives. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Metal shelves held boxes labeled by year: property zone, council minutes, storm response, public trust, marine rescue, community funds. "People think libraries keep books," Maribel said, pulling on cotton gloves. "Mostly we keep receipts for what towns try to forget." She found the first box in less than 5 minutes. Blue Lantern Station, Trust Emergency Use Historical. Inside were deeds, photocopied maps, council notes, repair records, photographs, handwritten donation logs, and a brittle document bearing Adeline Wren's signature from decades earlier. Rhett read slowly. Legal language did not impress him. It had too much in common with camouflage, useful at times, dangerous when trusted blindly. "This says the station and land were dedicated to winter shelter and emergency harbor use. With conditions," Maribel said, "old ones. Ambiguous enough for lawyers to fight over, but clear enough that no honest person should pretend they don't exist. And Adeline, founding trustee, last living one. If she's moved out of Brightwater, or declared unable to manage her affairs," Maribel said, "the development committee has a cleaner path to petition for conversion." Rhett looked up. Maribel had already pulled another file. "Lumen Ridge, preliminary site plan. The map was glossy, new, and offensively clean. On the northern point where Blue Lantern stood, the plan showed a landscaped walkway labeled Sunset Promenade. Benches, decorative lights. No station, no tower, no room of names, no history. They erased it, Rhett said. Maribel's voice was quiet. No, they renamed the absence. She turned a page and froze. Rhett saw the line before she pointed to it. Resolve trustee complication before final investor review. Trustee complication. Adeline Wren had been reduced to 2 words. Something old and cold settled behind Rhett's ribs. He had seen men disappear into military acronyms before. Casualty reports, incident summaries, operational necessity. Language could shrink a human being until no one felt the weight of them anymore. Maribel copied the documents while Rhett stood by the table, listening to the hum of the lights and the distant groan of the building in winter wind. When she handed him the folder, her hands trembled slightly. I kept these records dry for years, she said. That is not the same as protecting them. No, Rhett said, but it means they survived. She looked at him then, and something in her face steadied. They left through the rear door of the library because Maribel wanted to avoid the front desk, until her expression learned how to lie again. The alley behind the building was narrow, banked with plowed snow and shadowed by the brick wall of the old pharmacy. Kestrel was not with Rhett. He remained with Adeline at the clinic. Yet as Rhett stepped into the alley, he found himself expecting the dog to stop, sniff, and insist the world had hidden something in plain sight. This time, Rhett noticed it himself. A corner of white paper protruded from beneath the wooden step outside the staff entrance. He crouched and pulled free a sealed envelope, damp along one edge, tucked so carefully that anyone leaving in a hurry might miss it. His name was not written on it. No name was. Inside was a photocopy of a Willowmere transport schedule. Adeline Wren's name had been highlighted. 2 other resident names appeared below hers. The route line listed Miller's Cut Road, then showed an original warning in typed text. Wind exposure risk, avoid during lake effect storm. The warning had been crossed out by hand. In purple ink, Rhett looked toward the clinic several blocks away. He thought of Paige Harlan's trembling pen, her pale face, Kestrel's low whine. The girl had not been ready to speak. But she had found another way to tell the truth. By the time Rhett Langford returned to Dr. Hazel Portman's clinic, the afternoon light had gone thin and silver. Brightwater Cove looked clean after the storm, but not peaceful. Snowbanks stood along the streets like white walls built overnight by tired giants. Plows had carved narrow paths through Main Street. Icicles hung from awnings, and the lake beyond the harbor flashed cold blue whenever the clouds broke apart. People moved carefully, speaking in low voices, as if the town itself had become a patient nobody wanted to wake too quickly. Inside the clinic, Adeline Wren sat propped in the observation room, wrapped in a gray blanket and her patchwork coat, looking very much like a queen forced to hold court in a supply closet. Kestrel lay across the doorway. The 7-year-old German Shepherd K9 lifted his black and brown head when Rhett entered. His amber-brown eyes moved first to Rhett's hands, then to his face, then to the folder tucked under his arm. The dog saw more than paper. He saw burden. He had always been rude that way. Adeline noticed too. "You found something," she said. Rhett looked at Dr. Hazel Portman, who stood at the counter writing notes with the expression of a woman personally offended by sloppy handwriting. Hazel's short silver-gray hair was tucked behind her ears, her white coat open over the dark cardigan she wore against the clinic's old drafts. "Copies," Rhett said. "Library records, Blue Lantern Trust, Lumen Ridge plans." Adeline's eyes dimmed and sharpened at the same time. "Did they erase the tower?" "They renamed the land." "Cords," she said. "Even thieves used to have the courtesy to break windows." Hazel glanced up. "Do not get yourself worked up. I am old, doctor. Worked up is one of the last free entertainments available to me." Rhett set the folder on the chair beside her. He did not tell her every detail. Not yet. Not the phrase about resolving a trustee complication. Not the way her life had been reduced to language small enough to fit between investor notes. Adeline watched him with pale blue-gray eyes. "You are keeping the ugliest part in your mouth," she said. Rhett said nothing. She nodded slowly. "Good. Chew it a while before handing it to an old woman." Hazel crossed her arms. "She needs rest." "She needs proof," Adeline corrected. Rest is what people prescribe when they are afraid of what memory might do standing up. Rhett looked toward Kestrel. "I need to visit some names from the plates." Adeline's fingers moved to the cedarwood box on the blanket. "Albie first." "Albie? Knox, boat repair. Hands like old anchors. Temper like a stove with a cracked pipe. He knows the lamp-room key." Hazel shook her head. "You are not going anywhere, Adeline. I did not say I was going. I said he was." She looked at Kestrel and him. Kestrel rose as if summoned by a rank higher than Rhett's. Rhett frowned. He stays with you. No, Adeline said. That dog found me when people lost me. If there is truth under snow, he will hear it complaining. Hazel looked at the dog, then at Rhett. Take him. She'll sleep better knowing he's working. That is a terrible reason, Rhett said. It is a medically convenient one, Hazel replied. Adeline reached out and touched Kestrel's head. Go on, Your Majesty. Keep the large man from mistaking silence for peace. Kestrel huffed softly as if accepting the assignment. Rhett left the clinic with Maribel Shaw 10 minutes later. Maribel had insisted on coming. The librarian stood on the sidewalk in her navy parka, moss-green scarf wrapped at her throat, copper-framed glasses catching the pale light. At 44, she had a quiet, slender presence that people underestimated until they needed a record from 1979, and she produced it in under 3 minutes. Her dark brown hair was clipped back with a plain metal barrette, and her warm brown eyes carried the calm anxiety of someone who knew paper could save lives, but only if someone had the courage to read it aloud. You don't have to do this, Rhett said. Yes, Maribel answered. I do. He waited. She adjusted the canvas bag on her shoulder, the one stuffed with copies from the archive. I spent years keeping these files dry and organized. That is not the same as protecting what they mean. Kestrel sniffed a snowbank, sneezed once, and looked offended by the moral state of the town. Maribel glanced down. He agrees. He charges extra for commentary. Their first stop was near the old boatyard north of the harbor, where the road narrowed between warehouses, stacked crab traps, rusted trailers, and mounds of snow pushed aside by plows. A hand-painted sign on a corrugated metal building read, Knox boat the engine if it sinks, don't lie about why. Albie Knox opened the door before Rhett knocked a second time. He was 66, thick through the chest and shoulders, though age and years of labor had bent him slightly forward. His white-gray hair stuck out in stubborn tufts beneath a wool cap. A heavy mustache hid most of his upper lip, while gray stubble roughened his chin. His face was weather-beaten, the skin around his pale blue-gray eyes creased by wind, squinting, and long suspicion. He wore a dark brown waxed work jacket over a red and black flannel shirt, heavy work pants, and old boots crusted with salt. His hands were broad, scarred, and stained with oil so deeply they looked carved from dark wood. His eyes moved from Rhett to Maribel to Kestrel. Dog can come in, Albie said. People depend on their behavior. Inside, the shop smelled of sawdust, engine grease, coffee burned past forgiveness, and cold metal warming near a space heater. Tools hung on pegboards in a system that looked chaotic until Rhett realized every wrench had a kingdom. Half-repaired motors sat beside coils of rope and old brass fittings. Against one wall leaned pieces of weathered wood that might once have been boat ribs or pier planks. Rhett took out the brass key-tagged lamp room. Albie stopped moving. The change was subtle. His jaw tightened. His oil-darkened fingers flexed once, then curled into his palm. Where did you get that? Adeline Wren. Albie's face hardened first, then cracked around the eyes. She alive? Yes. The old man turned away and looked at the wall of tools. For a moment he seemed to be studying a hammer. Rhett knew better. Some men looked away because tears embarrassed them more than lies. Stubborn old lighthouse witch, Albie muttered. Maribel's mouth softened. You know the key. I fixed the lamp room door in 1999 after the hinges froze, and Adeline declared the building was committing treason. Albie reached out but did not take the key. She's still carrying that coat? Yes. She stitched half this town into that thing. His voice roughened. Wouldn't let people thank her proper. Said gratitude was only useful if it kept somebody else warm. Rhett set the key on the workbench. What was Blue Lantern? Albie gave him a look as if the question was both foolish and necessary. It was a place where winter wasn't allowed to finish its meal. He picked up an old metal cup and poured coffee that looked strong enough to remove paint. Nobody drank it. In '99, my boat got crushed in shelf ice. Lost my engine, my gear, most of my pride. I made it to shore half frozen and mean enough to bite the hand that helped me. Adeline dragged me into Blue Lantern, put me beside the stove, wrapped me in a blanket that smelled like cedar and wet dog, and told me I was not allowed to die because I still owed her a proper repair on the north window. Maribel took out a copied trust record. We're trying to show it served a community emergency purpose. Albie snorted. Served? Listen to library language putting a church hat on a working mule. He crossed to a shelf, pulled down a long-handled hammer, and turned it over. Burned into the grip were 2 letters. A.W. She gave me this after I fixed the roof braces. Said I was cheaper than a contractor and twice as loud. His mouth twitched. Fair assessment. Kestrel had been circling the shop quietly. Suddenly he stopped near a stack of old cedar boards, lowered his nose, and pawed once at a plank near the floor. Albie looked down.
What's he found?
Rhett crouched. Wedged between two boards was a small strip of blue fabric, old and stiff, with white stitching along one edge. Albie stared at it, then took it carefully. Adeline's blanket tags, he said. Blue for bunks, red for kitchen, green for medical shelf. She stitched colors because not everybody could read well, and because she said panic made fools of the literate. Maribel took a photo with her phone. Albie looked at Rhett. You want witnesses? You'll get some. But don't expect everyone to stand tall just because the truth does. People got bills. People got children working for Sutter's crews. People got fear dressed up as common sense. Who else? Rhett asked. Albie's face tightened. Rita Fallow. The bakery? She won't like seeing you. Why? Because she remembers too much. Rita Fallow's bakery sat near the harbor, warm light glowing against the snow-fogged windows. The painted sign read, Fellow Bread va Pies, though one corner had chipped away. Inside, the air smelled of yeast, cinnamon, butter, coffee, and the holy defiance of soup simmering against winter. Rita stood behind the counter rolling dough with unnecessary force. She was 59, full-figured and strong in the way women become when they have carried flour sacks, grief, payroll, and everyone else's hunger for too many years. Her chestnut brown hair, threaded with silver, was twisted into a loose bun. Her face was round, warm and tired, with brown eyes that could soften at a child and sharpen at a creditor in the same breath. She wore a deep red sweater under a cream apron dusted with flour, dark trousers, and practical shoes. A folded towel stuck from the apron pocket like a flag of surrender she refused to raise. She looked up when they entered. Then she saw Albie behind them. If you came to complain about my coffee, go drink bilge water. Your coffee and bilge water exchanged recipes, Albie said. Rita pointed the rolling pin at him. And yet you keep coming back. I'm researching suffering. Kestrel gave one soft sneeze. Rita's eyes moved to the dog, then to Rhett. You're the seal who found Adeline. Yes. Is she alive? Yes. Something passed over Rita's face too quickly to name. Then she looked away. I'm busy. Maribel took a small folded cloth from her bag. It was a yellow scrap Rhett had found among Adeline's pocket items that morning, carefully wrapped around one of the nameplates. Rita saw it and stopped rolling dough. The bakery seemed to fall quiet around the ovens. Maribel laid the scrap on the counter. Rita's fingers, white with flour, hovered above it. Where did she keep that? In her coat, Rhett said. Rita touched the fabric. For a second, the woman behind the counter was not a bakery owner facing unpaid taxes. She was a younger woman standing in snow with smoke in her hair and nothing left but one ugly yellow scarf. My house burned in February, Rita said quietly. Years ago, I got out with one boot and a skillet. Don't ask why the skillet. Panic makes strange dowries. Albie muttered. You tried to fight the fire with it. I was young and persuasive. You were concussed. I was spirited. Her eyes shone, but she did not let tears fall. Blue Lantern took me in 3 nights. Adeline gave me soup, socks, and a lecture about not apologizing for surviving. Said I snored like a patriotic chainsaw. Albie nodded. Accurate. Rita's mouth almost smiled. Then it closed. I signed Malcolm Sutter's petition, she said. No one spoke. Rhett watched her hands. They trembled against the counter. I signed because my freezer is dying. Because I owe taxes. Because tourists buy pie and memories don't. Because I am tired of counting winter like a sentence. She looked at the yellow cloth. Do you think I forgot because I wanted to? No, Rhett said. The answer seemed to hurt her more than accusation would have. Kestrel stepped forward, not toward the cloth, but toward the far end of the bakery counter. He lowered his nose beside a basket of day-old rolls and nudged a dented coffee can half hidden beneath the shelf. Rita went pale. She reached for it slowly and pulled out a bundle of folded bills, coins, and handwritten slips. On the lid, in faded green paint, were 3 words. Green light jar. The bakery still had a piece of the old Mercy sitting in plain sight, collecting nickels and secrets, while its owner told herself she had chosen only survival. Rita sat down hard on the stool behind the counter. My mother kept that jar, she whispered. Then I did, for heating oil, medicine, funeral flowers when people had no one. She swallowed. I stopped calling it green light after Malcolm's people started asking about old community funds. I told customers it was for winter hardship. Sounds safer, smaller. Maribel leaned in. Did anyone from North Shore Elder Advancement contact you? Rita's face closed. That clean little nonprofit? Yes. A woman came last spring. Said they were consolidating legacy funds for senior services. Said small local jars should feed larger support systems. She had a folder. She had shoes that had never met flour. Name? Rita shook her head. I don't remember, or I don't want to. Albie snorted. Rita, she glared at him. Do not old friend me, Albie Knox. I have a business balanced on a biscuit crumb. Rhett kept his voice low. We need truth when it counts, not a speech today. Not a fight you can't survive. Just truth when it counts. Rita stared at him, then at Kestrel, then at the yellow scrap on the counter. That dog looks like he knows every bad thing I ever did. He's selective, Rhett said. He has terrible manners. He learned from veterans. For the first time, Rita laughed. It broke through her fear like a match struck in a dark room. She pushed the green light jar toward Maribel. Take a picture, not the money. I still need to buy sugar. Her voice steadied. And if Adeline asks, tell her I still have the scarf. Tell her I just got scared. Rhett nodded. As they left, Rita called after them, and tell her I never snored. Albie said no one lies that well. By late afternoon, the light had begun to fade toward blue. Albie insisted on going to Blue Lantern Station before the next squall crossed the lake. Maribel hesitated, but the old boat repairman had already packed a flashlight, pry tool, headlamp, and a coil of caution tape into the back of his truck. Rhett drove with Kestrel in the back seat. Maribel sat beside him, holding the copied records against her chest. Albie followed in his rusted pickup, which sounded like a washing machine full of bolts but somehow kept moving. The road to the northern point curved past frozen reeds and low cedar trees. Lake Superior opened wide beyond them, darkening under the evening sky. Snow skimmed across the road in thin white snakes. Then Blue Lantern Station appeared. It stood on a rocky rise above the lake, smaller than memory but stronger than neglect. Weathered wooden siding had faded to silver gray. Pale blue-green window frames looked out toward the water. A small tower rose from one side, capped with snow, its old lamp dark behind cloudy glass. A brass bell hung near the rear entrance, green with age. The whole building leaned slightly into the wind, not defeated, but braced. Rhett thought of Adeline under North Pier. He thought of the map that had made this place disappear. Maribel whispered, "It looks like it's waiting." Albie grunted, "Buildings don't wait." Kestrel gave a low sound. Rhett looked at him. The dog was staring at the rear door. Albie took the lamproom key from Rhett and tried it in the lock. For one long second, nothing moved. "Don't you dare embarrass me," he told the door. The key turned. The door opened with a deep wooden groan that seemed to come from below the floor, from the old stones, from the lake itself. Inside, Blue Lantern smelled of dust, cedar, cold ash, old paper, and winters that had left but never fully gone. Flashlights moved over stacked chairs, folded cots, a long table, a black iron stove, shelves of chipped mugs, and a wall map of storm routes along the shore. The main hall was dusty but solid. The kitchen needed cleaning. The side room had shelves. The west corridor sagged slightly where the floorboards met shadow. Albie held up a hand. "Nobody goes west. Floor's questionable." Maribel unfolded an old floor plan. Main hall, kitchen, radio room, lamp stairs, side room. Kestrel moved ahead slowly, nose low. He did not wander like a pet. He worked like a priest of scent, reading old human traces in dust and wood. He stopped in the lamp room. The room was small, with narrow windows facing the lake and a ladder-like stair leading upward into the tower. Old tools hung on hooks. A cracked blue-green lens rested under a cloth on a shelf. Beneath the shelf, one floorboard sat slightly raised. Kestrel pawed once. Albie crouched. "Well, I'll be." He pried up the board and reached inside. The tin box he pulled out was flat, rust-specked and heavier than it looked. Maribel covered her mouth. Rhett set it on the table in the main hall. Inside were folded lists, photographs, storm maps, a smaller ledger, and metal nameplates wrapped in cloth. No treasure, no dramatic confession, just proof that mercy had once been organized. Maribel lifted the top page, warm room names. Under it were columns of names with notations: bunk, kitchen, stove, radio room, medical shelf, bridge pickup, harbor rescue. Kestrel followed Maribel to a narrow door beside the old radio room. The door stuck, then gave. Room of names was smaller than Rhett expected. The walls were lined with thin wooden rails. From them hung metal tags, each one stamped with a name. Some were polished, some tarnished, some had dates, some had only first names. There were fishermen, widows, children, veterans, drifters, nurses, truck drivers, men whose families had forgotten them, women who had outlived everyone who knew their stories. Mabel Dorsey, Samuel Baird, Lorna Quill, Rita Fallow, Albie Knox. Albie turned away sharply. Maribel touched one tag with 2 fingers. "These aren't records," she whispered. "No," Rhett said. "They're witnesses." On the small desk beneath the tags lay a folded note in Adeline's handwriting. Maribel read it aloud. "If the fund is ever touched, follow the green glass." Inside the tin box, Rhett found a half-moon piece of blue-green glass wrapped in cloth. Its shape matched the broken lens on the shelf. In the small ledger, several final entries were marked with the same little glass symbol in the margin. North Shore Elder Advancement, Community Readiness, Senior Transition Consulting, Lumen Ridge Preliminary Outreach. Maribel took pictures of each page. Albie swore under his breath softly and with craftsmanship. When they stepped outside, dusk had deepened. Snow had begun again. At the front entrance, a fresh red notice had been nailed across the door. Unsafe structure, entry prohibited by municipal order. Albie walked to it slowly. He read it once. Then again, his face went hard. This ain't right. Rhett looked at him. Albie tapped the bottom line. They're citing my preliminary note. I said West Corridor needs inspection before public use. I did not condemn the whole building. Maribel took another photo. Who could issue this so fast? Someone who knew we were here, Rhett said. Kestrel stood at the edge of the steps, body rigid, ears forward. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Rhett followed the dog's gaze. In the small parking area beyond the snowdrift, tire tracks cut fresh black lines through the white. They had not been there when the group arrived. Someone had come close enough to nail the notice. Close enough to watch. Close enough to know they had found the tin box. That night, after Rhett returned Maribel to the library and Albie to his shop, he drove back toward the clinic. The storm had not fully returned, but the lake wind was rising, and the sky above Brightwater Cove had darkened like iron left in water. His phone rang just as he pulled near the church. Unknown number. Rhett answered but said nothing. For several seconds he heard only breathing. Then a young woman's voice whispered, "Mr. Langford?" Recognized the fear before the voice. Paige Harlan. "I can't talk long," she said. "My mother is still inside Willowmere." Rhett pulled to the curb. "I'm listening. They know Adeline had the box. Vivian asked Grant to check your truck if he gets a chance." "I heard them." Paige's breath shook. "If they get the tin from Blue Lantern too, they'll say the fund records were incomplete. They'll say Adeline invented the rest. What are they trying to hide?" "The Green Light Fund wasn't just forgotten," Paige whispered. "It was folded into North Shore Elder Advancement on paper. But some of the money never reached resident services. It moved through consulting invoices, Lumen Ridge invoices." Rhett looked through the windshield toward the dark lake. "Why are you telling me?" A pause. Then, smaller. "Because Adeline used to know my mother's tea order. 2 sugars, no lemon. No one at Willowmere remembers that now. They remember medications, they remember room numbers. They don't remember people." Her voice broke, but she kept going. "And there's something else. The road they used for transport, the one by the cut near the lake. It wasn't safe. I put in the warning. Somebody removed it." Before Rhett could answer, a sound came through the line. A door opening, a muffled voice. Paige whispered, "I have to go." The call ended. Rhett sat in the truck, phone still in his hand. Outside, snow swept across the church steps and the town square beyond. The Lumen Ridge banners twisted in the wind, bright promises bending under the weight of weather. Kestrel sat in the back seat, staring toward the north road. Rhett followed his gaze. Somewhere beyond the town lights, Miller's Cut lay exposed beside the lake, where wind could turn a road into a white grave in minutes. And now Rhett knew. If someone ended up trapped there, it would not be because winter had been cruel. It would be because a warning had been erased. By 6 that evening, Brightwater Cove had learned to pretend the storm was only weather. People came to town hall with snow on their boots, worry in their pockets, and the private hope that someone else had already decided what courage would cost. They came from Main Street apartments, lakefront cottages, old farmhouses beyond the birch line, and small rented rooms over shops that barely survived the winter. They came because Malcolm Sutter had called the meeting urgent. Urgent was a clever word. It made fear feel organized. Town Hall stood at the center of Brightwater Cove, a square brick building with tall windows, a clock over the entrance, and a front walk salted so heavily it looked dusted with crushed bone. Inside, the room was too warm. Wet coats steamed on chairbacks, boots squeaked across the floor, paper cups of coffee passed from hand to hand. The old radiators hissed and knocked as if irritated by democracy. At the back of the room stood Rhett Langford. He did not sit. The 34-year-old Navy SEAL kept his shoulders relaxed, but nothing else about him rested. He wore the same old olive and military gray tactical combat shirt, its worn shoulders and frayed cuffs visible beneath the room's harsh lights. His earth-brown and moss-green combat pants were still marked with salt from the roads. His square, clean-shaven jaw was set, and his gray-blue eyes moved over exits, hands, windows, voices, alliances. Kestrel stood at his left side. The 7-year-old male German Shepherd K9 looked almost carved from dark bronze and shadow. His black saddle clear across his back, warm brown fur on his chest and legs, darker muzzle touched with a little silver. His ears stood high. His amber-brown eyes watched the room with the grave patience of an animal who knew humans often needed time to understand what dogs sensed at once. Near the third row, Adeline Wren sat between Dr. Hazel Portman and Iris Fenwick. Adeline looked small in the wooden chair, wrapped in her patchwork coat like an old map of storms survived. Her silver-white hair had been loosely pinned back, though several wisps had escaped around her lined face. The cedarwood box rested on her lap beneath both hands. She looked frail, yes, but not defeated. There was a brightness in her pale blue-gray eyes that age had not extinguished. It came and went like a lamp in wind. Hazel sat on one side of her, lean and sharp in her white medical coat, short silver-gray hair tucked behind her ears, reading glasses hanging at her chest. She had the expression of a doctor prepared to diagnose nonsense as a community illness. On Adeline's other side sat Iris Fenwick, small, precise, and dangerous in a deep burgundy cardigan. Her silver and black hair framed her jaw. A burgundy legal folder lay on her knees, and her red pen was already uncapped. Iris did not look angry. She looked ready. That was worse for anyone who planned to lie. Maribel Shaw sat near the aisle with a canvas bag full of copied records at her feet. Her navy parka was folded over the back of her chair, and her copper-framed glasses reflected the stage lights. She looked quiet enough to be overlooked and steady enough to regret underestimating. Albie Knox leaned against the side wall, broad arms crossed over his dark brown waxed jacket. His white-gray hair stuck out from beneath his cap, and his heavy mustache hid whatever softness tried to escape his mouth. He looked at the room as though most of it had been assembled with bad wiring. Rita Fallow sat near the back, close enough to hear, far enough to flee if shame grew teeth. Flour still dusted the sleeve of her deep red sweater beneath her winter coat. Her face was warm and tired, her brown eyes fixed on her hands. Rhett knew she had come straight from the bakery. He also knew she had almost not come at all. Vivian Cross occupied a chair near the front, perfectly arranged. Her cream wool coat was gone now, replaced by a pale gray blazer over an ivory turtleneck. Her chestnut brown hair was smoothed into its precise low knot. A leather folder rested on her lap, one black-gloved hand placed lightly atop it. She did not look toward Adeline. Near the side door stood Paige Harlan. The young Willowmere employee seemed smaller here than she had at the clinic. Her dirty blonde ponytail lay against the collar of her thin gray cardigan, and her pale blue scrub top looked too light for the room's heat. She held her tablet against her ribs. Her faded green eyes kept lowering, then lifting, then lowering again. Rhett saw the purple pen clipped to the tablet. Kestrel saw her too. The dog's ears flicked once. At the front of the room, Malcolm Sutter stepped into the lights. He was 48, tall and carefully built, about 185 meters, with a straight posture, and the polished confidence of a man used to people making room for him before he asked. His salt and pepper hair was combed neatly back. His face was clean, angular, and handsome in a controlled way, with dark brown eyes that could warm or cool by choice. He wore a long navy overcoat, a charcoal turtleneck, tailored dark trousers, black leather shoes, and a small silver pine pin at his lapel. Malcolm did not look like a villain. That was his power. He looked like a man who had brought numbers to a town exhausted by feelings. He looked like a man who understood bank loans, tax assessments, investor confidence, and the shame of watching a place grow poor while clinging to photographs of better days. He raised both hands. The room quieted. "Friends," Malcolm began. Rhett almost admired the word. It cost nothing and bought attention. "I know everyone is tired. I know the storm has made a hard week harder. But I asked you here tonight because Brightwater Cove stands at a crossroads, and I believe we deserve to face that crossroads together." Murmurs moved through the room. Malcolm turned toward the two large renderings mounted behind him. They showed Lumen Ridge Wellness Marina in golden light. Glass front lodges, a clean harbor walk, restaurants, spa buildings, small shops, bright families, smiling older couples, and a lake that looked obedient. 20 years ago, Malcolm said, our harbor employed families. Main Street had waiting lists for storefronts. Young people stayed. Winter brought work, not fear. Today, we are patching roofs we cannot afford, arguing over which services to cut, and watching our children build lives somewhere else. His voice softened. My father lost his fish packing shed in the winter of 2004. Some of you remember. He spent the rest of his life saying Brightwater was too proud to save itself. I used to hate him for that. He paused, letting the room lean toward him. Now I understand what he meant. Pride can look noble while it lets a town starve. Rhett felt the shift. People were not merely listening to Malcolm. They were finding their own bills inside his words. The Lumen Ridge project is not about erasing Brightwater, Malcolm continued. It is about giving Brightwater a future worthy of its past. Jobs, tax relief, visitors, new businesses, a senior wellness wing that will bring modern care to the shore, a marina that puts us back on the map. He turned slightly toward the North Point rendering. But renewal requires difficult choices. There it was, the door in the speech where something living would be asked to leave. The old Blue Lantern station has served this community in the past. No one denies that. But it has been neglected for years. It is structurally questionable, financially unsustainable, and emotionally complicated for many residents. We honor its history, we truly do. But we cannot build tomorrow by chaining ourselves to every sorrow of yesterday. A few heads nodded. Not many. Enough. Malcolm did not smile. Smiling would have been too hungry. He looked solemn, almost sorrowful. Vivian Cross rose next. Her voice entered the room like folded linen. I would like to speak briefly from the perspective of resident safety. Rhett felt Kestrel shift beside him. Vivian moved to the front with her leather folder. She did not hurry. She did not look nervous. She looked professional, which was more useful than courage in certain rooms. Mrs. Wren is a cherished member of this community, Vivian said. No one questions her history or her heart, but those of us who work in elder care understand that memory can become painful, and attachment to certain subjects or places can sometimes create distress. Adeline's fingers closed around the cedar box. Vivian continued. Mrs. Wren has experienced documented anxiety surrounding Blue Lantern Station, as well as concerning behavior involving keys and other objects hidden in her clothing. Good intentions from friends and neighbors may unfortunately intensify that distress. Hazel muttered. Friends and neighbors are now a diagnosis. Iris did not look up from her notes. Let her hang herself with silk. Vivian's voice remained gentle. We must be careful not to confuse sentiment with safety. Vulnerable elders deserve compassion, yes, but compassion must be structured. It must be informed. It must be responsible. Responsible. Rhett watched the words settle over Adeline like snow over a footprint. Malcolm stepped back to the front. Mrs. Wren, he said, his face tender in a way Rhett did not trust. Adeline, if you would like to speak, of course the floor is yours. The room turned. Adeline stayed seated for a moment. Rhett saw her hands tremble. Not much. Enough. The cedar box shifted on her lap. Hazel moved as if to help, but Adeline gave the smallest shake of her head. I am old, she whispered, not ornamental. Hazel leaned close, then stopped wobbling decoratively. Adeline huffed, which might have been a laugh. She stood. The room grew so quiet that the radiator seemed suddenly rude. For a few seconds, Adeline said nothing. Her pale eyes moved over the crowd, and Rhett saw the danger, not fear of speaking, fear of losing the thread. Her lips parted, closed, parted again. Vivian lowered her gaze to the folder as if already preparing the note. Anxiety episode, disorganized speech, poor orientation. A cough came from the back. A chair creaked. Snow ticked against the tall windows. Kestrel left Rhett's side. He did not hurry. He walked down the center aisle with the calm authority of an old soldier crossing a church. His black and brown coat caught the light. His collar made one soft sound. He stopped beside Adeline and pressed his head beneath her shaking hand. Adeline looked down. Her fingers sank into the fur between his ears. The breath she took then seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. At least this boy knows to wait while an old woman finds her first sentence, she said. Some people in this room have degrees and still haven't learned that. A ripple of laughter passed through the hall. Small, human, enough. Then something slipped from Adeline's sleeve and struck the floor with a tiny metallic sound. Kestrel lowered his nose and nudged it back toward her shoe. It was a nameplate, old and tarnished, stamped with the words Mabel Dorsey. Adeline stared at it as though the dead had tugged her sleeve. For one heartbeat, the room no longer felt like a meeting. It felt like a witness stand where even the forgotten had found a way to arrive. Adeline picked up the plate. Mabel Dorsey, she said. An elderly man near the front lowered his eyes. She had a blue hat with one feather and a cough that scared the gulls. Green Light Fund bought her coal the winter her son stopped answering letters. She paid us back in knitted mittens no one asked for and everyone wore. A few people smiled. Adeline turned slightly. Albie Knox. Albie looked at the floor as if it had betrayed him. Lost his boat in ice. Came in cursing so hard the stove nearly blushed. Slept 3 nights under a blue blanket. Cried when the choir sang, though he blamed smoke. I did not cry, Albie said. You leaked from the face. A laugh broke wider this time. Adeline looked toward the back. Rita Fallow came to us with 1 boot, a skillet, and a scarf yellow enough to shame the sun. Her house was gone. She said she did not snore. That was a lie told with great confidence. Rita covered her mouth. Her eyes shone. Adeline continued, voice unsteady but gaining shape. Maribel Shaw sat by the west radiator when she was 21 and too proud to admit her apartment had no heat. She shelved old magazines after supper because she said hands should stay useful when the heart is embarrassed. Maribel removed her glasses and wiped them, though they were not fogged. Samuel Baird got heart medicine through green light when his pension check was late. Lorna Quill got window glass before the big freeze. The Baker twins slept in the radio room after their father's truck went off Route 6. Mrs. Alvarez brought bread. Pastor Reed brought firewood and sermons too long for emergency conditions. Now the room listened differently, not politely, personally. Names moved through the hall like little flames passed from hand to hand. Adeline touched her coat. You can call Blue Lantern old wood if it helps you sleep. You can call memory complicated if plain speech gives you hives. But I remember who came through that door. I remember who had frost in their hair, who lied about being hungry, who asked for one blanket and took two because pride makes fools of the cold. Her hand tightened on Mabel's nameplate. A town is not only what it builds next, it is also what it refuses to let freeze. For a moment no one spoke. Then Maribel stood. She carried copies of the trust documents to the front table. Her voice was quiet, but the microphone carried it. Blue Lantern Station was not abandoned property. It was dedicated by trust for winter shelter, emergency harbor use, and community care. The language is old, yes, and it needs legal review, but it does not support quietly removing the station from planning documents while the last living founding trustee is being relocated out of town. Iris Fenwick rose beside her, burgundy folder open. Adeline Wren has not been declared legally incompetent. A facility assessment is not a court order. Her rights do not disappear because they inconvenience investors, caregivers, or municipal paperwork. Hazel stood without ceremony. From a medical standpoint, cold exposure, dehydration, and acute distress after being found under a pier do not prove long-term incapacity. Anyone trying to use that event as a shortcut diagnosis should be ashamed, corrected, and possibly sued. Order negotiable. A nervous murmur moved through the room. Vivian's expression stayed smooth. Only her gloved fingers tightened on the folder. Albie pushed off the wall. The condemnation notice on Blue Lantern cites my preliminary repair note, he said. Preliminary means inspect the west corridor. It does not mean condemn the whole building. Malcolm lifted a hand. Albie, with respect. Don't use respect as a napkin after making a mess. That drew a sharper murmur. Then Rita stood. That changed the air more than the legal papers had. Rita was not a lawyer, doctor, librarian, or Navy SEAL. She was the woman who baked bread before dawn, extended credit when people pretended they had forgotten their wallets, and knew who bought day-old rolls because pride was cheaper than fresh pastry. Her voice trembled. I signed the petition supporting Lumen Ridge, she said. I did, because my bakery is tired, because I am tired, because the freezer sounds like a dying tractor, and the tax bill does not care about my feelings. She took a breath. But if Blue Lantern once kept me alive, I do not have the right to sit here and pretend it is just old wood. Silence settled over the room in a different shape. Rhett saw Malcolm recognize the shift. Not defeat, not yet. But the clean line of his meeting had been smudged by names, soup, coal, mittens, window glass, and a dog standing beside an old woman like a guardian from a forgotten myth. So Malcolm did what skilled men did when sentiment threatens strategy. He answered with hard truth. I do not doubt anyone's memories, he said. I do not. But memories do not repair foundations. They do not pay insurance. They do not fund emergency staffing, accessibility upgrades, medical oversight, heating systems, liability coverage, or safety inspections. He turned slowly, including everyone. Rita, your bakery is struggling. Albie, you know what structural repairs cost. Dr. Portman, you can barely keep weekend coverage. Maribel, the library budget has been cut twice. Sheriff Raines, how many times have you asked the county for more emergency funding and been told to wait? At the side of the room, Sheriff Boyd Raines looked up. Boyd was 61, tall and broad-shouldered in a dark brown sheriff's jacket over his uniform shirt, with close-cropped gray hair, weathered skin, and tired brown eyes that had spent years trying to keep neighbors from becoming enemies. A radio sat clipped near his chest. His face belonged to a man shaped by long winters and longer compromises. Boyd was not weak, but he had made peace his habit, and habits could become cages. Malcolm continued, if someone falls in that building, who pays? If the stove fails, who answers? If a volunteer makes a mistake, if an elder dies, if a storm traps people inside a place we knew was unsafe, will a song stand in court? Will a nameplate cover damages? Hope drained from faces as quickly as heat leaving an open door. Even Maribel had no immediate answer. Rhett hated Malcolm then, not because the man lied, but because he knew how to use truth without mercy. Adeline's hand tightened in Kestrel's fur. The dog leaned into her knee. Then Boyd's radio crackled. Static tore through the room, sharp and ugly. A dispatcher's voice broke through, strained and thin. Sheriff, North Shelter reports generator failure. Repeat, generator failure. Heat unstable. Transport van delayed near Miller's Cut. Multiple elderly residents awaiting relocation. Temperature dropping. The room froze. Malcolm turned toward Boyd. What transport? Vivian stood. That may be Willowmere's secondary group. Paige Harlan near the side door went white. The lights flickered once, twice, then died. A few people gasped. Someone cursed. The radiators clanked and went silent. The bright renderings of Lumen Ridge vanished into shadow, their glass lodges and golden walkways swallowed by the dark. Emergency lights glowed red above the exits. Outside, wind struck the windows so hard the frames shuddered. Boyd raised the radio. Dispatch. Say again on the shelter. Static answered. Then North Shelter cannot accept arrivals. Need alternate heated site. County plow delayed. Miller's Cut visibility poor. No one moved. Then Adeline's voice came from the third row, small but steady. Blue Lantern has a stove. The words hung in the red light. Chanket's in room of names. Blue ones on the left, red ones if mice haven't formed a union. Albie said automatically, mice lack the discipline. Adeline glanced at him. So does the council. A nervous laugh moved through the room, then faded into thought. Malcolm stepped forward. Sheriff, that building has been posted unsafe improperly. Albie snapped. Under questionable municipal procedure, Iris added. Hazel said, and the people waiting in the cold are not procedural. All eyes turned to Boyd Rains. For years, Boyd had kept peace by waiting for tempers to cool, waiting for paperwork, waiting for someone above him to make the decision that might anger half the town. In small places, waiting could look like wisdom. Tonight, with the radio coughing fear into the room and the storm pressing its face to the glass, waiting looked like a locked door. Boyd looked at Malcolm, then Vivian, then Adeline, then the red glow where Lumen Ridge had disappeared. His jaw worked once. We need a heated site. Malcolm's voice hardened. Graham, Boyd did not raise his voice. We need one now. Iris stepped beside him, pen ready. State your authorization clearly. Boyd drew a breath. I am authorizing temporary emergency use of Blue Lantern Station as an overflow warming site, subject to immediate safety check by Albie Knox, restricted to approved areas only. Iris wrote quickly. Main hall, kitchen, side room, Maribel said, voice shaking but practical. West corridor sealed. Medical corner in the side room, Hazel said. Food from the bakery, Rita added. Soup, bread, coffee. And if anyone complains about the soup temperature, they can regain circulation through gratitude. Albie grabbed his coat. I'll check structure. Rhett looked down at Kestrel. We can help with routes. The dog's ears lifted. Malcolm's silver pine pin caught the red emergency light and flashed once like a small star. You may regret this, he said. Boyd looked at him, tired but steady. Probably, he replied, but I'll regret leaving people in the cold more. The room began to move. Chairs scraped. Coats were pulled on. Flashlights emerged from bags. People who had arrived to discuss the future suddenly found themselves recruited by the present. Then Paige Harlan stood. Her tablet was clutched against her chest. Her face was pale, but her voice carried. The van should not be near Miller's Cut. Vivian turned slowly. Paige swallowed. I flagged that route. Wind exposure, drift risk. I entered it in the schedule notes. Her eyes flicked to Rhett, then to the room. The warning was removed. The hall went silent again. This silence was colder. Vivian looked at Paige as if the young woman had shattered something expensive. Malcolm stepped in quickly. This is confusion in a crisis. We do not have time to litigate scheduling notes. Rhett looked at the dark windows, where snow had begun to erase the world beyond the glass. He was right about one thing. They did not have time. The truth could wait for paperwork. The people out there could not. The storm met them at the doors of Town Hall like a beast that had been waiting. Snow rushed sideways across Brightwater Cove, no longer falling from the sky so much as charging through the streets. The town square, which an hour earlier had held banners, parked trucks, and people arguing over the future, now looked like a battlefield drawn in white. Street lamps blurred into halos. Storefronts vanished behind curtains of wind. The Lumen Ridge signs snapped against their poles until their bright promises twisted and slapped like flags from a conquered kingdom. Rhett Langford stepped out first with Kestrel at his side. The 34-year-old Navy SEAL kept his head low against the wind. His old olive and military gray tactical combat shirt was visible beneath the open collar of his outer layer, the frayed cuffs brushing his wrists as he tightened his gloves. His lean, compact frame moved with purpose, not haste. Panic wasted heat, and in weather like this, heat was a form of prayer. Kestrel stood beside him, black and brown coat already freckled with snow. The 7-year-old German Shepherd K9 lifted his muzzle into the wind, amber-brown eyes narrowed, ears erect, body steady. The black saddle across his back vanished and returned as snow swept over him. He did not bark. He listened with his whole body. Behind them, Sheriff Boyd Raines raised his voice over the storm. "Stay together. No one walks alone. If you cannot see the person ahead of you, yell." Boyd looked older in the red glow from Town Hall's emergency lights. His broad shoulders filled his brown sheriff jacket, but the weight on him was no longer only weather. It was decision. He had opened a door no paperwork had wanted opened, and now the storm demanded he prove the choice with action. Albie Knox came down the steps carrying a tool bag in one hand and a coil of caution tape in the other. His dark brown waxed jacket was dusted white before he reached the sidewalk. He looked at the sky and spat into the snow. "Lake's in a mood." Rita Fallow followed with 2 younger volunteers pulling sleds loaded with soup pots wrapped in towels, loaves of bread, coffee canisters, paper cups, blankets, flashlights, and whatever else she had decided the human race required to survive. Her deep red sweater showed beneath her coat, and flour still clung to her apron because apparently even disaster had to wait its turn behind baking. "If anyone drops the soup," she shouted, "I will haunt their descendants." One of the volunteers, a lanky 23-year-old named Drew Vance, gave a nervous laugh. Drew had sandy hair flattened under a knit cap, a long narrow face, and the soft hands of a hardware store clerk who had not expected the evening to become heroic. He kept glancing at Kestrel as though hoping the dog might distribute instructions. Maribel Shaw held the old floor plan under her parka, one hand pressed flat against it as if guarding scripture. Iris Fenwick carried her burgundy folder inside her coat, red pen tucked behind one ear. Dr. Hazel Portman had her medical bag strapped across her shoulder, and the expression of a woman prepared to scold hypothermia itself if it got in her way. Adeline Wren refused to remain behind. That argument had lasted 90 seconds and ended only because Hazel decided a controlled inconvenience was safer than an old woman attempting an unsupervised escape out of spite. Now Adeline sat in Boyd's sheriff SUV, wrapped in her patchwork coat and 2 blankets, cedarwood box clutched in her lap. Her silver-white hair had loosened around her lined face, and her pale blue-gray eyes burned with exhausted authority. "I am supervising," she announced through the cracked window. "You are sitting," Hazel said. "That is how queens supervise when surrounded by fools." "Then be a quiet queen," Adeline sniffed. "History rarely improves when quiet people are in charge." Rhett glanced at Kestrel. "She's your responsibility now?" The dog did not look at him. That was answer enough. They moved through Brightwater in a crooked line. Rhett and Kestrel went ahead, then Boyd with a flashlight, then Albie, Maribel, Hazel, Iris, Rita's sled team, and the sheriff SUV crawling behind when the road widened enough. The storm turned 4 blocks into a pilgrimage, snow packed around boots. Wind shoved at shoulders. Once, Drew slipped and nearly pulled a sled sideways before Rita grabbed the rope and informed him that Brett had more balance than he did. Blue Lantern Station emerged slowly from the white. First came the rise of the roof, then the small tower, then the pale window frames and the dark rear door half buried by snow. The building stood on the rocky point above Lake Superior, weathered and silent, like an old ship waiting for the tide to remember it. Rhett felt Adeline watching from the SUV. He took the key from his pocket. It was old brass, worn smooth by decades of hands. For a moment he held it in his palm while the storm roared around him. A small thing, a ridiculous thing almost. Yet every locked world began and ended with one. The key entered the rear door. The lock resisted. Albie leaned close. "Don't force it." Rhett looked at him. Albie sighed. "Fine, force it politely." Rhett turned the key again. The lock gave. The door opened with a deep groan, and Blue Lantern breathed out years of cold air, dust, cedar, old ash, lake damp, and memory. Albie entered first with his headlamp on. "Nobody goes past me," he barked. "If a floor eats you, I am not negotiating with it." Inside, the beams creaked but held. Flashlights moved over stacked chairs, folded cots, a black iron stove, old shelves, a long table, a cracked bulletin board, and the doorway to the west corridor. Albie moved through the room, tapping floorboards, testing posts, checking the stovepipe, muttering to himself in a language made of curses and structural judgment. "Main hall holds," he said. "Kitchen holds. Side room holds. West corridor stays closed unless you want to meet the basement quickly." Maribel spread the old floor plan on the table and weighed the corners with soup cans. "Main hall here, kitchen there. Radio room, side room, lamp stairs, room of names beside the radio room." Iris wrote everything down. Temporary use restricted to approved areas. Hazel pointed to the side room. "Medical corner." Rita pointed to the kitchen. "Mine." Albie looked at the stove. "Needs coaxing." "So do most men," Adeline said from the doorway. Rhett turned. Boyd had helped her inside despite Hazel's glare. Adeline sat in a chair just inside the approved area, wrapped in blankets like a small ancient oracle who had already judged them all and found them loud. Kestrel crossed to her, touched his muzzle to her knee, then returned to Rhett's side. Adeline watched him go. Good. The large man needs supervision too. Within minutes, Blue Lantern changed. Not repaired, not restored, changed. Flashlights became lanterns. A dusty table became a supply station. The side room became Hazel's medical corner. Maribel found the room of names and brought out blue blankets, red blankets, old oil lamps, a tin of spare batteries, and a small brass bell wrapped in cloth. Adeline saw the bell and closed her eyes. That rang when someone came in alive, she said. Rita took command of the kitchen with the authority of a battlefield general and the apron of a woman who considered hunger a personal insult. She set volunteers to ladling soup into pots, stacking bread, warming coffee over a camp burner, and wiping mugs that had not seen service in years. Albie and Boyd worked behind the kitchen on the old generator. It coughed once, choked, died, then coughed again. Albie hit the casing with a wrench. Hazel called from the side room, "Is that an approved repair method?" "It's a conversation," Albie shouted back. "Sounds abusive." "It responds to tone." The generator sputtered, groaned, and finally caught. One bulb flickered above the main hall, then another. Then a weak line of golden light trembled across the ceiling. The room went still. Above them, in the little tower, something clicked. A faint green glow stirred behind cloudy glass, dim at first, then steadying against the storm. Not bright, not grand, just alive. Adeline's face folded inward, and for once she had no joke ready. Rhett looked at the green light touching the windows and felt something move in his chest that was not quite hope, and not quite grief. Maybe the old stories had been right. Maybe fire had always been stolen from gods by fools desperate enough to care. Then Boyd's radio crackled. Sheriff Miller's cut group still exposed. 2 residents located in transport van. 1 possible chest distress. Road partially blocked, visibility low. Hazel grabbed her bag. Chest distress is not waiting for poetry. Rhett tightened Kestrel's collar and clipped on the rescue lead from his kit. "I'll go." Boyd nodded. "Take Drew. Rope line, 10-minute check-ins." Drew's eyes widened. "Me?" Rita shoved a bundle of blankets into his arms. "Congratulations. You've been promoted from bread security." Rhett looked at him. "Stay behind me. Do what I say. If you can't see me, stop." Drew swallowed. "Yes, sir." Kestrel was already at the door. The storm outside struck harder than before. Rhett tied the rope line around his waist and passed it to Drew. Kestrel moved low through the snow, nose working, ears cutting the wind. The world became flashlight beam, blowing white, the tug of rope, the dog's dark shape ahead. They found the Willowmere van near a drifted curve at Miller's Cut. Its rear wheels had sunk into snow. The engine was off. Inside, 2 elderly residents waited beneath thin blankets. The first was Samuel Baird. Samuel was 78, tall once but bent now, with a narrow face, gray skin and white hair cropped close to his head. A veteran's pin clung to the lapel of his heavy coat. His right hand pressed against his chest, but his eyes were not seeing the van. They stared past Rhett into a different storm, one made of artillery and heat and young men shouting in a language memory never translated. "Wind sounds like incoming," Samuel whispered. Rhett understood. Not fully. No man could fully enter another man's battlefield. But enough. "Samuel," Rhett said, "you're in Brightwater. You're safe. We're moving you to Blue Lantern." Samuel shook his head. His breathing quickened. Kestrel stepped into the van. He did not bark. He did not climb over the man. He lowered himself beside Samuel's knees and rested his muzzle against the old veteran's hand. Samuel froze. His fingers touched the dog's dark muzzle, then moved to the silver at the fur's edge. Kestrel breathed slow. In, out. After several seconds, Samuel followed. "Well," Samuel said shakily, "that's a persuasive animal." Rhett almost smiled. He has references. They got Samuel onto the sled with blankets and hand warmers. The second resident, a small woman named Mrs. Evelyn Caro, was 84, with soft brown skin, silver curls under a knitted purple hat, and the dignified expression of someone who had survived too many institutions to be impressed by any of them. She was cold but alert. "I told that driver this road was a bad idea," Evelyn said as Rhett wrapped her hands. "Nobody listens to old women until we become lawsuits." Drew stared at her. She looked him up and down. "You'll do. Pull evenly." "Yes, Mom," Drew said. They brought Samuel and Evelyn back through the storm, guided by Kestrel and the rope line. When Blue Lantern's rear door opened, the small brass bell rang once in Maribel's hand. The sound was thin. It was also holy. Inside, Hazel checked Samuel's pulse and chest. Rita gave Evelyn tea and asked if she took sugar. "2," Evelyn said, then stopped. "No lemon." Adeline looked across the room. "Of course, lemon is what people add when tea has lost hope." Evelyn stared at her. Then her eyes filled. "You remember?" Adeline shrugged. "You once threatened to haunt me if I forgot." Evelyn began to cry, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet shock of a person realizing she had not been filed away after all. Kestrel, crusted with snow and breathing hard, walked to the room of names instead of the stove. He stood beneath a row of old metal tags and gave one low whine. Maribel followed with her flashlight and found Samuel Baird's tag already hanging there, tarnished but whole. Beside it was an empty hook. Adeline saw it from across the hall and whispered, "Some names wait for the living to come back." Rhett looked at the empty hook and felt the old weight of Jonas Vale stir, not like a wound this time, but like a door beginning to unlock. More calls came after that, a fallen branch, a blocked driveway, one resident missing from a nearby cottage. Rhett should have let someone else go. Kestrel's gait had changed slightly, only slightly. Most people would not notice, but Rhett saw the brief stiffness in the dog's back leg when he rose from beside the stove. "No," Rhett said quietly. Kestrel looked at him, not pleading, not defiant, only waiting. Rhett crouched and set one hand on the dog's warm brown chest. Beneath the fur, Kestrel's heart beat fast but steady. "I'm not spending you because I'm guilty," Rhett whispered. The dog blinked. This time, when the next call came, Rhett left Kestrel inside. He took Drew and Boyd. They found Lorna Quill behind her cottage near the shore road. Lorna was 76, broad-hipped and sharp-eyed, with iron-gray hair braided over one shoulder and cheeks red from cold and fury. She had fallen beside the back steps while trying to bring in firewood. Her heavy green coat was dusted white, and one boot had gone sideways into a drift. "I was not stuck," she said from the snow. "I was reconsidering my relationship with gravity." "Gravity seems committed," Rhett said. "Too committed. Clingy, frankly." They got her wrapped and loaded onto the sled. By the time they returned, Blue Lantern was fully awake. People sat wrapped in blue blankets. Soup steamed. Hazel's medical corner had 3 patients and 1 argument. Rita was threatening to feed anyone who claimed not to be hungry. Albie had taped off the west corridor with enough warning strips to discourage even fools. Kestrel lay near the stove, but his head lifted when Rhett came in. Rhett crossed to him and touched his ear. "Good call staying." The dog looked unconvinced. Then he rose. Slowly, his ears went forward. His nose lifted toward the east door. Rhett felt the change at once. "What?" Kestrel walked to the east entrance and gave a low growl, not toward the room, toward the storm outside. Boyd's radio crackled again. "Single vehicle off Shoreline Road east of station. Unknown occupant. Reports of fuel smell. Visibility poor." Rhett looked at Kestrel. The dog did not paw at the door. He did not demand to run. He stood there, body tired but certain, nose pointed toward the east. Rhett understood. Kestrel did not need to spend himself in the storm this time. He had already pointed to the door. Rhett took Drew and Boyd again, following the direction Kestrel had marked. The wind had shifted, pushing snow from the east. They found the car nose down in a shallow ditch, half buried beside the Shoreline Road. Inside was Vivian Cross. The perfect director of Willowmere House looked nothing like the woman from the clinic or town hall. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its careful knot. Her face was pale under the dashboard glow. One black glove was missing. Her cream coat was twisted beneath the locked seatbelt, and her clean shoes were wet with slush. For a moment, she stared at Rhett through the cracked side window. Recognition crossed her face. Then shame tried to cover it and failed. "Mr. Langford," she said, voice shaking. "Save the paperwork." The driver's door was jammed against packed snow. Rhett broke the passenger window with his rescue tool, cleared the glass, and climbed halfway inside. Vivian's hands trembled too badly to free the belt. "I was going back to Willowmere," she said quickly. "The generator. I told Malcolm it wasn't tested. I told him the route notes. Talk inside." "The warning was inconvenient," Vivian whispered. That was the word. Inconvenient. Rhett cut the belt where it had locked and helped her through the passenger side. She nearly collapsed when her boots hit the snow. He caught her elbow. She looked down at his hand as if she did not understand why it was there. This was not forgiveness. Rhett knew that. But if mercy only worked for people who deserved it, mercy was just another locked room. When Vivian entered Blue Lantern, conversation dimmed. Several faces hardened. Adeline went very still. Kestrel, exhausted but alert, stood beside Adeline's chair. He did not growl this time. He watched. Vivian looked around. Samuel Baird wrapped in a blue blanket while Hazel listened to his chest. Evelyn Caro holding tea with 2 sugars and no lemon. Lorna Quill arguing with Rita about whether soup needed pepper. Maribel writing names and medications on a clipboard. Albie carrying firewood across the main hall. Adeline seated near the piano. Not managed, not filed, not relocated. Known. The word seemed to strike Vivian harder than accusation. A volunteer asked Evelyn, "Would you like more tea, Miss Caro?" Evelyn nodded, and her mouth trembled again at the name. Vivian turned away quickly, wiping at one eye with the heel of her bare hand, as though emotion were an employee behaving badly. Later, when the worst of the first wave had settled and the generator held steady, Vivian approached Iris near the supply table. Rhett stood nearby, one hand resting on Kestrel's head. Vivian's coat was wrapped crookedly around her shoulders. Her hair had loosened at one side. The polished director had been stripped down by cold until only the woman remained. "I kept copies," she said. Iris looked up. "Of what?" Vivian placed a packet on the table. Printed emails, transfer schedules, internal notes. A draft agreement between Willowmere administrators, North Shore Elder Advancement, and representatives tied to Lumen Ridge. "Not because I was brave," Vivian said. "Because I wanted protection if this collapsed." Rhett said nothing. Vivian swallowed. The fund transfers were described as consolidation. Legacy community support moved into regional elder advancement, then consulting invoices, outreach, readiness, language clean enough to sleep under. Her voice broke slightly. Adeline's objections were inconvenient because she remembered what the money was for. Iris's red pen stopped moving. Paige Harlan stepped from near the kitchen doorway. The young woman looked as if she had been crying in the storm before entering, though the snow on her hair had melted into damp streaks. Her gray cardigan clung to her thin shoulders. Her purple pen was gone. In her hand was a small recorder. "My mother is still at Willowmere," Paige said. Vivian closed her eyes. Paige held out the recorder to Iris. "This has Vivian telling us not to document Adeline's objections in full, and Grant saying the transport notes should match the final route, not the first one." Her hand shook violently. "I was scared," Paige whispered. "I am still scared." Adeline looked at her for a long moment. "Good," the old woman said. "Courage without fear is just recklessness wearing perfume." Paige broke then, silently, one hand over her mouth. Vivian turned toward Adeline. "I did not think of myself as cruel." "No," Rhett said. "You thought of yourself as efficient." The words landed. Vivian nodded once, barely. Adeline did not forgive her. She did not reach for her. She did not turn pain into a pretty lesson because the room wanted one. She only said, "Truth late is better than a lie on time. Do not mistake it for atonement." The night deepened. The storm kept beating at the windows, but inside Blue Lantern, people survived in pieces. The soup was too salty. The generator coughed. One bulb flickered as if considering retirement. The piano had a dead key and possibly a grudge, but the green light in the tower held. Near midnight, when the last call had quieted and the patients were stable, Adeline asked Rhett to help her into the room of names. Kestrel rose to follow, slower now. Rhett almost told him to stay. He did not. The room was cold but sheltered. Metal tags lined the walls, catching flashlight glow. Adeline opened a small wooden drawer beneath the desk and removed a blank nameplate. She placed it in Rhett's hand. "Who is the one you could not bring home?" Rhett's throat closed. Kestrel stood beside him, shoulder against his leg. The storm filled the silence. For years the name had been a sentence, a verdict, a weight he carried like a stone under his ribs. Now in this room of names it became something else, not lighter, warmer. "Jonas Vale," Rhett said. Adeline nodded. "Some people cannot be brought back," she said, "but they can still be kept from disappearing." Rhett closed his fingers around the blank plate. Outside, the lake threw snow at the windows. Inside, the green light burned above them, weak and stubborn and alive. Morning did not make Brightwater Cove look saved. It made the damage visible. Snow stood in high walls along Main Street. Broken birch branches lay across sidewalks like pale bones scattered after some ancient battle. A power crew worked near the church, their orange vests bright against the white world. The Lumen Ridge banners still hung from the poles in the town square, but they sagged now, torn at the corners, their polished promises weighed down by ice. Blue Lantern Station smelled of soup, wet wool, old cedar, wood smoke, dust, and people who had survived a night they would not soon forget. Some residents woke on folded cots beneath blue blankets. Some sat quietly with paper cups of coffee, staring at the weak morning light through the tall windows as if daylight had to prove itself before being trusted again. The old generator behind the kitchen coughed every few minutes, still loyal, but deeply offended by age. The green lamp in the tower had gone dim in the dawn, but it had stayed alive through the storm. Rhett Langford stood near the rear door with a mug of coffee cooling in his hand. He had slept less than an hour. His old olive and military gray tactical combat shirt was wrinkled from the night's work, the frayed cuffs damp from melted snow. His earth-brown and moss-green combat pants were streaked with salt and ash. The square line of his clean-shaven jaw looked harder in the morning light, but his gray-blue eyes were different, not softer exactly. Rhett was not a man who softened quickly, but something in him had shifted from locked to listening. Kestrel lay at his boots. The 7-year-old male German Shepherd K9 had earned every minute of rest. His black and brown coat had dried in uneven patches near the stove. The black saddle across his back looked duller from fatigue, and the warm brown fur on his chest still held the faint scent of snow. His darker muzzle, touched with silver, rested on his paws. His amber-brown eyes were half closed, but his ears still moved whenever a door opened, a cup dropped, or an elderly voice changed tone. Every person who passed touched his head. Kestrel accepted each hand with the tired patience of a king receiving citizens after a siege. "You both look terrible," Adeline Wren said. Rhett turned. Adeline sat near the old piano, wrapped in her patchwork coat. Her silver-white hair had escaped its loose pins, and a crumb from one of Rita Fallow's biscuits clung to her sleeve with shameless dedication. Her cedarwood box rested on the bench beside her. She looked fragile, exhausted, and absolutely unwilling to be treated as either. "You look rested," Rhett said. "I am 82. Rested is no longer on the menu." Kestrel thumped his tail once. Adeline pointed at him. "Do not encourage the large man. He already has the posture of someone who thinks silence is a personality." Rhett took a sip of coffee. "It has served me well. Has it?" He did not answer. Across the room, Dr. Hazel Portman checked Samuel Baird's pulse while informing him that denial was not a cardiac treatment. Samuel, the old veteran rescued from the Willowmere van, sat wrapped in a blue blanket, looking embarrassed by the attention and secretly grateful for it. Evelyn Caro held tea with 2 sugars and no lemon, guarding the cup as if it had been returned from a war. Lorna Quill argued with Rita about soup pepper. Rita, flour still somehow on her sleeves after a storm and a rescue operation, told Lorna that anyone who had recently lost an argument with gravity had also lost seasoning privileges. Maribel Shaw moved through the room with a clipboard, writing names, medications, addresses, and family contacts in neat, careful rows. Iris Fenwick sat at the long table with Sheriff Boyd Rains, documenting the emergency authorization, the names of witnesses, the sequence of radio calls, and every decision made after the town hall power failed. Boyd looked older than he had the night before. His broad shoulders were still there beneath his brown sheriff jacket, but the habit of waiting had cracked in him, and the crack had let honesty in. By noon, the county road reopened. Then the official cars arrived. The first belonged to the State Department of Aging and Independent Living. From it stepped Nadine Keller, a woman in her early 50s with a square, practical build, deep brown skin, close-cropped black hair threaded with silver, and calm eyes that seemed to prefer listening over performing authority. She wore a dark wool coat, waterproof boots, and no jewelry except a small silver watch. Her voice was low and even, the kind that made people speak more carefully without knowing why. Nadine carried a clipboard, but she did not hide behind it. Behind her came Assistant Attorney Mara Ellison, 41, tall and narrow, with auburn hair cut just above her shoulders, pale freckled skin, and gray eyes that moved like a searchlight over details. Her black coat was simple, her boots muddy within 5 minutes, and her expression suggested she respected facts more than comfort. She had the clipped patience of someone who had spent years listening to powerful people explain accidents that were not accidents. A county building inspector arrived too, Caleb Rowe, a broad man in his late 40s with a shaved head, a short dark beard, and hands scarred from old construction work. He wore a yellow hard hat despite being indoors, as if safety gear were a religion, and he its most stubborn priest. No one was dragged away in handcuffs. No crowd cheered. Justice did not enter like thunder. It entered with forms, photographs, patient questions, and the slow discipline of people who knew that truth had to be nailed down before it could hold weight. Nadine interviewed the elderly residents privately in the side room. Mara Ellison photographed the posted unsafe notice from Blue Lantern's door, the taped-off West Corridor, the room of names, the green light fund ledgers, Vivian Cross's copied emails, and Paige Harlan's audio recording. Caleb Rowe inspected the main hall, kitchen, side room, stovepipe, rear entrance, and west corridor, muttering into his recorder as Albie Knox followed him with the offended dignity of a craftsman whose warning had been turned into a weapon. "I said, inspect the west corridor," Albie told him for the 4th time. Caleb looked at the sagging boards beyond the caution tape. "You were right." Albie blinked. "Say that again, slower." "You were right." Albie turned toward Rita. "Witnesses." Rita called from the kitchen. "I heard nothing useful. I am busy saving civilization with biscuits." By mid-afternoon, Malcolm Sutter's statement reached the town by email, local news, and gossip, which in Brightwater traveled faster than broadband. He resigned as chair of the development committee. His statement mentioned procedural misunderstandings, weather-related pressure, and a desire to prevent distraction from Brightwater Cove's future. It did not mention Adeline under North Pier. It did not mention the route warning. It did not mention Green Light Fund. It did not mention the phrase trustee complication. It was exactly the kind of statement a man wrote when he wanted accountability to wear soft shoes. But Mara Ellison did not wear soft shoes. Neither did Nadine Keller. They began asking questions about the transfer orders, the relationship between Willowmere House and North Shore Elder Advancement, the consulting invoices tied to Lumen Ridge, the altered transport schedule, the use of Adeline's objections in Willowmere notes, and the sudden condemnation of Blue Lantern Station based on a preliminary repair memo. The Lumen Ridge project did not vanish. That disappointed some people and relieved others. Brightwater still needed work. Rita still had taxes. Albie still knew the old harbor jobs were not coming back just because people remembered them fondly. Young families still needed reasons to stay. Hope did not become evil because Malcolm had used it badly. That was the hard thing. A town could not live on memory alone, but it could not survive by selling its soul and calling the receipt progress. Late that afternoon, Kestrel rose from beside the stove and walked to a cardboard evidence box where Nadine Keller had placed personal items gathered from Willowmere's transport van. The German Shepherd lowered his nose, gave one soft whine, and nudged a small cloth pouch toward Adeline. Inside were 4 old keys tied with faded blue thread. Adeline did not reach for them at first. Evelyn Caro did. Her wrinkled hand trembled as she whispered, "Those were mine." Then Samuel Baird looked up and said, "They took mine too." One by one, the room understood that Adeline had not been the only person whose doors had been quietly stolen. After that, the interviews changed. Residents who had been too embarrassed to complain began speaking. Evelyn said staff at Willowmere had removed her mailbox key because it increased agitation, though all she wanted was to check for letters from her granddaughter. Samuel admitted his room key had been taken after he kept trying to walk outside during panic episodes, but no one had replaced the loss with conversation, only locks. Another resident, Mr. Harold Nims, 81, thin as a rail with watery blue eyes and a brown cardigan buttoned wrong, said his late wife's locket had been placed in safe storage and never returned. Nadine listened to all of it. She did not promise miracles. That made Rhett trust her more. 3 days later, Vivian Cross lost her position at Willowmere. She did not become beloved because she handed over documents. Brightwater was not that foolish, and Adeline was not that sentimental. Vivian testified. She admitted that staff had been encouraged to treat personal objects, resistance, and repeated requests as symptoms to be managed rather than preferences to be understood. She admitted the transfer timing had been influenced by outside pressure. She admitted that efficiency had become a costume for care. When she finished her first formal statement, she turned once toward Adeline. Adeline did not forgive her. Not then. She only nodded. Small, grave, enough to say truth had been heard, not enough to erase what truth had uncovered. Paige Harlan testified too. She shook so badly that Nadine Keller had to offer her water twice. Paige spoke about the route warning, the transport notes, the pressure to keep language vague, and the recording she had made because fear had taught her to collect proof before courage arrived. Her mother was moved temporarily to another facility during the investigation, and Paige cried when she said she still felt guilty for not speaking sooner. Iris Fenwick, sitting beside her as support, said, "Sooner is a place cowards use to shame the brave after the danger has passed." Paige cried harder, but she kept speaking. 2 weeks later, Adeline was evaluated by an independent geriatric specialist named Dr. Owen Lark. He was 60, tall and stooped, with warm brown eyes, a neatly trimmed gray beard, and a bald head that shone under clinic lights with unfortunate dignity. He wore a tweed jacket under his medical coat and had the gentle habit of asking questions as if offering them, not firing them. He spent nearly 2 hours with Adeline. He asked about dates, money, weather, medication, family, risk, and choice. She forgot one county official's name, corrected him on the history of lake-effect storms, and told him his tie looked like it had been chosen by a depressed wallpaper salesman. Dr. Lark wrote in his report that Adeline had memory gaps, stress-related confusion, and physical frailty. He also wrote that she understood her basic circumstances, could express consistent preferences, and should not be deprived of decision-making rights based solely on institutional convenience. When asked where she wished to live, Adeline said, "Somewhere keys are not treated like knives." That sentence went into the report. She did not return to Willowmere. A small care circle formed around her instead, not as charity but as repair. Hazel managed medical checkups. Iris handled legal documents. Maribel organized records and appointments. Rita delivered bread twice a week and lied badly about it being extra. Albie repaired Adeline's porch steps while loudly accusing the previous carpenter of studying under a drunk squirrel. Boyd arranged wellness checks during heavy snow. Drew Vance, still looking surprised by his own usefulness, volunteered to shovel the walk. Rhett came by when the weather turned bad. He told himself he was checking the road. Adeline told him that was nonsense and made him carry firewood inside. By the third week after the storm, Blue Lantern Station had become official enough to have paperwork and unofficial enough to still have a soul. The town council under temporary leadership approved it as a seasonal emergency warming site pending structural repairs. A local foundation offered a small grant. The church donated old tables. Rita took over the kitchen schedule with the intensity of a general defending a holy city. Albie repaired floor joists, replaced the rear door hinges, patched the roof, and threatened to haunt anyone who used the phrase rustic charm in his presence. Maribel transformed the room of names. She did not turn it into a museum. Museums could make memory feel finished. Instead, she made it a living archive. Photographs, storm maps, copies of ledger pages, nameplates polished but not over-polished, a shelf where people could leave stories written in their own hands, a wall map showing homes helped by Green Light Fund, not to shame anyone, but to prove Mercy had once had an address. One evening, Sheriff Boyd Raines stood before a small gathering in the main hall. His hat was in both hands. "I waited too long," he said. "I told myself I was keeping peace. Sometimes peace is just fear wearing manners." No one applauded immediately. Then Rita clapped once, hard. The rest followed. Rhett did not become the town's leader. He refused 3 committee seats, 1 newspaper interview, and Rita's suggestion that he pose for a fundraiser poster wearing something less grim. "I don't own something less grim," Rhett said. "You have teeth," Rita replied. "Try showing them." What he accepted was smaller, a key. Adeline gave it to him on a cold Thursday afternoon while Albie installed the new rear lock at Blue Lantern. It was a brass copy tied with a strip of blue cloth. "For nights below 10 degrees, she said, "and mornings when people forget doors require opening." Rhett looked at the key in his palm. "Thank you." That was the expected response, yes. He slid it into his pocket. Later, in the room of names, Rhett stood before the empty hook that had waited beside Samuel Baird's old tag. Adeline sat nearby. Kestrel sat at Rhett's left side, quiet and rested now, though he still moved with a trace of stiffness from the storm. On the work table lay a new metal tag. Rhett had engraved it himself with Albie's tools, slowly, imperfectly, each letter a small act of surrender. Jonas Vale Jonas had never slept in Blue Lantern. He had never warmed his hands at the black stove, or complained about Rita's soup, or heard Adeline insult bad tea. But Adeline had said the remembered needed warmth, too. Rhett lifted the tag and hung it on the hook. No music swelled. No light burst through the windows. The dead did not speak. Kestrel leaned his shoulder against Rhett's leg. That was enough. For years, Jonas's name had been a locked room inside him. Now it hung among other names, not erased, not explained, not fixed, but held. Rhett understood then that memory did not have to be a prison. Sometimes it could be a lamp left burning for anyone still wandering in the dark. Kestrel became Blue Lantern's unofficial doorkeeper. On cold evenings, he lay near the entrance. Black saddle toward the room, warm brown paws crossed, amber brown eyes half-lidded but alert. People greeted him before they signed in. Children who came with parents learned to ask before touching him. Old men pretended they did not need to pet him, then did anyway. Kestrel accepted all this tribute with the patient dignity of a tired king whose kingdom smelled faintly of soup. He moved more slowly after the storm. Rhett saw it. He also saw peace in the dog that had not been there before. Kestrel no longer scanned every road as if the next missing person was already calling. Sometimes he slept beside the stove while voices filled the hall. Sometimes that was the work, to rest where people expected you to be. The final visit came on a bright afternoon at North Pier. Rhett drove Adeline there before the next snow. Kestrel rode in the back seat, head between them, breath fogging the air with great importance. The lake was blue and silver under the sun. Snow glittered on the pier railings like salt scattered by old lake gods. The wind was cold but not cruel. Rhett helped Adeline from the truck. "I can walk," she said. "I know. Then why are you hovering? Professional habit. Try acquiring a less irritating one." Kestrel walked ahead, paws careful on the packed snow. At the place where Rhett had climbed down beneath the pier, the drifts had softened the slope again. If he had not known where to look, he might have missed it entirely. That tightened something in his chest. So much mercy depended on noticing. Adeline took a blue strip of cloth from her pocket and tied it to the railing. Her fingers were slow, but the knot held. "For the ones who almost vanished," she said. Rhett stood beside her. Across the snow-bright valley, Blue Lantern Station was visible on the northern point. Its tower rose above the birches. The green lamp was faint in daylight, but it was there. Kestrel sat between them, ears high, looking from the pier to the distant light as if checking that both ends of the story remained where they belonged. "Do you know, Mr. Langford," Adeline said, "people keep waiting for courage to arrive with trumpets. Does it? Almost never. Usually it mutters, puts on boots, and does one inconvenient thing." Kestrel sneezed. Adeline nodded. "Exactly." Rhett smiled. "Not much. Enough." He touched the brass key in his pocket. He thought of Jonas's tag hanging in the room of names. He thought of Vivian's unfinished atonement, Paige's shaking voice, Boyd's public confession, Rita's bread, Albie's stubborn repairs, Maribel's careful files, Hazel's merciless kindness, and Adeline's old hands tying blue cloth against the wind. Brightwater Cove was not healed. Not yet. But it was breathing. And sometimes God did not send miracles as thunderbolts. Sometimes he sent them as a dog that would not stop barking, an old woman who would not let go of a box, a key worn smooth by forgotten hands, and a man who thought he had already failed once too deeply to answer another call. Rhett looked down at Kestrel. The dog looked back, amber eyes steady. Then, from far across the snow and birches, the green light of Blue Lantern glimmered faintly in the afternoon, weak, stubborn, alive. And for Brightwater Cove, that was the first miracle. Sometimes, miracles do not arrive with thunder, trumpets, or a sky split open by light. Sometimes, God sends a miracle through a loyal dog that refuses to stop barking, through an old woman who refuses to let go of the truth, through a forgotten door that still has a key, and through one wounded man who finally chooses to stop, listen, and care again. In our everyday lives, there may be someone near us who feels unseen, unheard, or forgotten. It may be an elderly neighbor, a quiet friend, a tired parent, a veteran carrying silent pain, or even a stranger who just needs one person to notice. We may not always be able to change the whole world, but with God's grace, we can open one door, answer one call, offer one kindness, and become a small light in someone else's storm. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a reminder that mercy is still alive. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or share a moment when an animal, a stranger, or God's quiet timing changed your life. And if you believe stories like this still matter, please subscribe to The Last Seal Shepherd, so we can continue bringing you tales of loyalty, courage, faith, and the miracles hidden in ordinary lives. May God bless you, protect your family, comfort anyone carrying a silent burden, and place a faithful light along every dark road you have to walk.